I have the privilege of introducing our speakers. Sister Danna, whom I've known for over 30 years, and her dear husband here, Brother Kalon, who feels like I've known for a long time. Give them your undivided attention, and it'll be a blessing to us all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Danna. And we want to mention to all of you that we've been here for several months, and we truly have been blessed by each one of you. And we just want to thank you that we could be part of your life here at Uchee Pines for the time that we've been here. And I guess this is kind of our way of saying thank you back. And so we hope what we share with you will be a blessing, as you said, for eternity.
You might want to sit down. I'm going to be a few minutes.
Okay.
Well, before I get into what I want to share on my PowerPoint this morning, I just want to let you know we do have a few things up here for sale, not a lot. We would have had more, but the flu kind of curtailed our preparation. And so if you hear us spit and sputter up here a little bit, we're still recovering from the flu. I don't think we're contagious. We haven't had fevers for over a week, but we weren't able to do some of the things that we wanted to do by way of preparation. But we do have a little booklet on basic wilderness survival. This was written by a good friend of ours, Jim Buller. Jim has given us unlimited permission to use all of his materials, and so we like to work in conjunction with him. We were actually hoping to do a camp meeting here with him, but they were not able to come this soon. This little book, I think I've got like 10 copies. They're $12. That's what I have to sell them for, $12. We also have, tomorrow, we will be teaching knot tying, how to tie knots, why you need to learn to tie knots, and we're going to, hopefully, we've allowed enough time to actually learn some knots together. So we have some sections of paracord. These are for sale. They're only $5, which I think is very reasonably priced based on what we see online. I do have here, and I just want to point this out, we have a whole bunch of little bitty short pieces here on the front. These are not toys, and they're not to take home with you, because these are the ones that we use when we teach classes. So we're going to let you use those tomorrow, but I'd like to get those back. So we have the paracord. I think it's 50 feet, $5, very reasonable price. I bought a pair of military boots on eBay. I emailed and asked the guy beforehand if they were wide because I have duck feet. They are not. And so they're too narrow for me. So I have these for sale as well. They're size 7.5. We have one knife and one more. If you don't know what this is, if anybody knows what a SAM splint is for first aid kit, it's a padded aluminum splint. It's moldable. You can cut it. You can use it for a broken finger, broken arm, broken leg. You can make a C-collar out of it. These are very handy to have in your first aid kit. And what we do to put them in our first aid kit is we just straighten it out flat and then fold it so that it fits more flat into a first aid kit. So right up here on the first step is the items that we have for sale. Now, I wanted to address some questions that you may or may not have right here at the outset. The name of our ministry is Closure for Jesus. Now that kind of sounds like an odd name. And why would we name our ministry Closure for Jesus? I'm going to talk about that a little bit. I'm going to share with you a song that God gave me shortly before I married Kalon. And that's the second question. Has anybody ever wondered how we met? He's from North Dakota. I'm from down here. Y'all want the short version or you want the longer version? Okay, short version is a mutual friend introduced us. If you want the longer version, I'll be happy to share that, but it's going to take me a few minutes. So what is your pleasure? Long version. Okay, 9, my best friend died with breast cancer. And in her heart was born the desire to develop this ministry called Closure for Jesus. And I'll talk about that again in just a minute. But when she died, she sort of handed the baton to me for this ministry. And those were some really big shoes to fill. And so I spent a lot of time in prayer and deep, earnest study. And I was lonely. I needed help in the ministry. So I started praying for a husband. Some friends of mine had discovered that I was praying for a husband. So they urged me to sign up for Adventist Singles, which I thought was rather dumb, because I just feel like that's like window shopping for a husband, and I just don't have that kind of wisdom. And so, but to get them off my back, I signed up for 1 month, okay? And I chatted with a few guys, but the Lord and I had this conversation, and I said, Lord, I have to know that we're on the same page spiritually before I can go anywhere with this. I've got to know that we're going to be united. And so, you know, you chat with these guys. I love rock music. I love race cars. I love pizza. Ta-ta. You know, that's not the one. But there was one profile that I saw that the guy was spiritual and, you know, just seemed to have his head screwed on straight. But he lived in North Dakota, and I was not about to move to North Dakota. So I rejected him. Then, 2011, my mother got sick with C. diff, which is kissing cousins to botulism. If you don't know, she was nearly dead when I came down here. And I had to kind of put my daughter feelings aside and just go into nurse mode. She was that sick. And I just moved here. I was living in Kentucky at the time, and I was in the middle of a juice fast, so I brought all my vegetables, and I just moved in and took over the kitchen, the house, everything. And my dad, my stepdad, who was different, he was very cooperative, which was very unusual. I think God was in this. So at any rate, I was caring for my mother, and I was juicing her, and I had never treated C. diff before. And so I was begging God to give me wisdom, and I threw everything at her that I could think of. And when she started to recover a little bit, by this time I had been traveling and speaking a little bit on behalf of the ministry. And I had some friends here at UCHI, and I called and I said, you know, I would like to come here and do a presentation on the sufferings of Christ for you guys. And just hear me out and see if you see what I'm talking about here, if this makes sense to you. So I came, and when I did, much to my surprise, there were 2 people here who had been students of mine when I taught here, and they had gone off and got married after they had gone through the LE program together. And he had been all over the place being a pastor. And so they invited me over to their home after the meeting. And when I got ready to go back home to take care of my mom, Dennis Miller looked at me. He was the chaplain here at the time. And he said, can I ask you a question? And it kind of had that tone, you know, that you know where he's going with this. You know what the question's going to be. And he said, can I introduce you to a friend of mine? And I said, well, let's pray about it for a few days. So I wasn't playing hard to get. I was genuinely, sincerely gun shy, you know, because I had been proposed to a couple times, and I just didn't have peace that this was it. I had even courted some when I was here at UCHI teaching back in the 90s, but it just wasn't it. And so I wasn't ready, was the biggest thing. I was just nowhere near ready. So I was on my way back home to Kentucky, and I called Dennis Miller, and I said, listen, you know this guy, you know me. If you feel like God is leading you to introduce us, then you can give him my email. I don't want to talk to him on the phone, because I know myself, and I know I hear this sweet talking voice in my heartstrings get. No, I'm not going there. I want to talk to him on email. Let's see if we're on the same page spiritually. Okay, so he gave my email, and cyberspace gobbled up the message that this guy sent me because I never got it. And so I called Dennis up and I said, listen, I ain't got time to play. If this guy is interested, then he needs to email me because I'm not, I'm praying for a husband. So Dennis contacts the fella. Poor guy had emailed me and was waiting on a response. So this was like a week, almost 2-week delay. So I emailed him. Dennis gave me his email and said, well, you email him and that way we'll know we have the right email address. So I emailed him and we communicated back and forth for about 2 weeks. Okay, I'm going to stop right here and I'm going to rewind just a little bit. Because when I came home from doing the meeting and I told my mother what just happened, that my friend here wanted to introduce me to somebody, she starts going, oh baby, oh baby, oh my baby girl, oh baby. And that's all she would say. And I'm like, Mom, what's with the oh babies? She never told me. So then I pack up and I move back home to Kentucky where I was living. I was living with a girlfriend of mine at the time. I had sold my property in Kentucky and I needed a place to stay and she had extra room and we were good friends. So anyway, I walk in the house. Suzanne, guess what? This friend of mine wants to introduce me to this, oh, Danna. Oh, Danna. Okay, Suzanne, why are you saying this? She said, I had a dream that you were going to be introduced to your husband while you were in Alabama. Goosebumps. I have goosebumps right now telling this. So I get on the phone, Mama, guess what? I tell her Suzanne's dream. Oh, baby. Oh, baby. Mama had the same dream, that I was going to be introduced to my husband while I was here. So now God's got my attention. So we had communicated for about 2 weeks, back and forth on email. And I invited him to be friends on Facebook. And I nearly fell out of my chair because it was that guy from the Adventist Singles from North Dakota that I had rejected. Same guy. And the rest is history. And I am very thankful that the Lord gave me a second chance with this man. It has been a blessing. And we have since grown in our labors together in ministry, and it has really been a blessing. I have no doubt that I married the right man. He was worth the wait. I was 47 when we married. So if it's been a while and you've been waiting and praying, keep waiting and praying. It will be worth it. Now, when did Jesus move from the holy place to the most holy place? What year? 1844. Now, when do we know as Seventh-day Adventists that he could have come again? Everything was ripe. 1888. How many years was that between? Okay. Now, how many years since 1888? My husband's the mathematician. How many years has it been since 1888? 134 years. If Christ could have come 134 years ago, why isn't he back? Why isn't he here? And what has he been doing all those years? And do you think that maybe we're made in his image, right? If we miss our friends and family when we're away from them, do you think he misses us? Do you think he longs to be with us? Look at this passage here. This is talking about the children of Israel in the wilderness. Psalm 78:41, it says, yea, they turned back and tempted God, and what's that word in red? Limited. Did you know that we can limit God by our unbelief? By our lack of faith? They limited the Holy One of Israel. We're told, this was written in 1882. This is from Volume 5 of the Testimonies, page 275. She said, 2 years behind stands registered or recorded in the ledger of heaven. Now here we are 130 plus years behind. Do you think that's recorded in the ledger of heaven? I believe it is. Let's read this together. By giving the gospel to the world, it is in our power to hasten our Lord's return. We are not only to look for, but to hasten the coming of the day of God. That's from 2 Peter 3:12. Had the Church of Christ done her appointed work as the Lord ordained, the whole world would before this have been warned, and the Lord Jesus would have come to our earth in power and great glory. So there's a delay. He could have come already. There's a delay, and whose fault is it? It's our fault. Had we done what we should have, and in all these years that have ensued, Christ is still dealing with sin. There's no closure for Christ because we're still sending our boo-boos up there, our sin. What is closure? Closure, the word closure comes from the Latin word clos, which means to shut. It's something settled or resolved. It's the outcome of decision making, the desire for an answer that leaves no room for uncertainty. Will sin ever rise again in heaven? No. Well, why, if the name of our ministry is Closure for Jesus and our theme is hastening the second coming, why in the world are we teaching about wilderness living and no buy, no sell? It's because this is part of our message. This is part of faith. This is part of preparation. And if you notice the circle here, this is our new logo, the circle is not complete. There's no closure. And we're seeking as a ministry to close up that circle by helping God's people to understandingly cooperate with Him so that He can come again. I want to break down this passage and then we're going to get into the more, my husband's going to share some things. This is taken from Education, page 263. Those who think of the result of hastening or hindering the gospel, think of it in relation to themselves and to the world. Man, I am so sick of this world. I am ready to go home. I'm ready to get out of here. And those things are true. But what does this say? We don't think about the result of hastening or hindering the second coming as it relates to God, to Christ, to the Holy Spirit. Few give thought to the suffering that sin has caused our Creator. All heaven suffered in Christ's agony, but that suffering did not begin or end with His manifestation in humanity. The cross is a revelation to our dull senses of the pain that from its very inception. Think about how brutal the cross was, how intense was the agony. That is a revelation to our dull senses of the pain that from its very inception sin has brought to the heart of God. Every departure from the right. Have you ever departed from the right? Have you ever done anything cruel? Every deed of cruelty? Have you ever failed to reach His ideal? Then you've brought grief to the heart of God, and so have I. Let's put this passage together now. Those who think of the result of hastening or hindering the gospel, think of it in relation to themselves and to the world. Few think of its relation to God. Few give thought to the suffering that sin has caused our Creator. All heaven suffered in Christ's agony, but that suffering did not begin or end with His manifestation in humanity. The cross is a revelation to our dull senses of the pain, from its very inception, sin has brought to the heart of God. Every departure from the right, every deed of cruelty, every failure of humanity to reach His ideal brings grief to Him. I was discussing this with my friend Dennis Miller, who introduced us one day, and Denny challenged me, to write a song that sort of summarized the theme of our ministry. And so the Lord gave me the song that I'm going to share now. I'm going to sit down and just run the PowerPoint. And this was before my 5-hand surgery, so I haven't been able to play a whole lot the last few years. But I want to share this with you. I'm going to ask my husband to slide over and let me sit next to him. And we're going to play this song for you, so everybody will be focused up here up front.
The only ones in heaven will be on the Lord. The only ones in heaven will be on the Lord. He will cast our sin into the depths of the sea. He will wipe away all tears from our eyes. Oh, but who will comfort the Lord? Oh, but who will comfort the Lord? In Eden, God came calling to the man and to his wife. I was afraid, he said, to the God who gave him life, the God who gave him life. Oh, now you must die. The Lord heard his people cry down in Egypt's land. He sent his servant Moses to deliver by his hand, deliver by his hand. They hurled the accusation to Moses and to God. You brought us out to kill us upon this dusty sod, upon this dusty sod. Omnipotent power, limited by unbelief, filling the breaking heart of God with grief. Oh, God is grief. God sent a young prophet to plead on his behalf, but to his many earnest cries, God's children showed their wrath. His children showed their wrath. From the eyes of Jeremiah, God's tears did freely flow. His holy heart is breaking as to Babylon they go. Oh, why will you die? Why will you die? With bated breath they watched the Lord that day on Olivet. Baffled and confused, their expectations hardly met. Messiah was in tears. Messiah was in tears. Rocking to and fro in supernatural agony. What more could be done, he asked, that I've not done for thee? Oh, why will ye die? Why will you die? Only ones in heaven will be on the Lord. says, I rebuke and chasten. The seventh church now holds the key, the Lord's return to hasten. Oh, you need never die. Why will you die? He's knocking at the heart of every man and woman. Only let him in, and you and he will be one. Oh, you and God one. To him who overcomes, will I grant to sit with me upon the throne of heaven for all eternity, for all eternity. These will comfort the Lord. Oh, friend, you can comfort the Lord.
Okay, so I've got to turn the time over to my husband now, and he's going to share some things that the Lord has laid on his heart. And then after that, I think we're going to take a break after that, and then we'll get into some more practical things here.
I can't even tell you how many times I've heard that song, and every time I hear it, it touches my heart. I was really blessed because that song says so much. And when Danna and I had first met and I was introduced to her ministry, this was something strange to me. What do you mean, closure for Jesus? It took me a while to understand that. And I'm thankful that God has brought me to understanding that. And what I want to share with you this morning is, in some regards, related to that, and yet mostly what I want to share with you this morning, if any of you were here, our first no buy, no sell presentation, our focus was an emphasis on helping us to understand that indeed there must be a practical preparation for the time that's ahead. And we believe that. But today what I want to do is combine that spiritual with the practical. And we're going to use it through Scripture. And so I have some notes here. And first, I want to go to the Scripture verse that really, I think, well, we all are familiar with, but really identifies with the necessity for us to prepare for this no buy, no sell lifestyle. And that we find in Revelation chapter 13. You're familiar with the verses? Verse 16 and 17 I'm going to read. It says, And he causeth all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand or in their foreheads. Verse 17 says, And that no man might buy or sell, save he that had the mark, or the name of the beast, or the number of his image. So we know that there is a time coming when we will not be able to buy or sell. The Bible clearly tells us that. If you will be in a position to buy or sell, what must you do? You must have the mark. And we understand that that mark is the acceptance and receiving of the false day of worship, Sunday, in the place of God's seventh-day Sabbath. Now, I want to, again, as I said, bring this together, the spiritual and the practical. And if any of you have been going to prayer meeting the last couple of weeks, Brother Ashwin has really been touching on this subject, and I really have been blessed by it. Because Jesus is our example, and when we look at the life of Christ, he brought those two things together. He did a lot of healing. He did a lot of ministering. He reached out to people where they were. And that's what we're called to do. Christ is our example. And so one question and then one scriptural practical example I want to share with you of bringing this together. But I want to answer a question, and I'm going to take a long route to do this because there are some things I think we need to understand that are going to be taking place during this no-buy, no-sell time period that we need to understand, and it's in Scripture that we will see this. And so the question we need to answer is, how long will this last, this no-buy, no-sell time period? I think it's good for us to understand approximately the time that this should last, because there may be people thinking, well, you know what, I'll just bear down and grit down and I'll get through a couple of weeks or a couple of months. But we shouldn't have that mindset. And so we need to look at how long will this last. And I want to begin with that. And then Jesus as our example. And so what I want to do is, if you have your Bibles with you, you can turn with me. If you don't, I'll be reading it. I'll find my notes here. I'll ask another question. Who or what is the church? And this is something that I think, especially as Seventh-day Adventists, I don't know if all of you are Seventh-day Adventists or not, it doesn't matter. But we need to be careful because John chapter 10 and verse 16 says, "Therefore, other sheep I have, not of this fold. Them must I also bring. And they shall hear my voice. And there will be one fold and one shepherd." So God's people are waiting to hear his voice. And in Revelation chapter 12 and verse 17, we are familiar with that verse as well. "And the dragon was wroth with" who? The woman. Who is the woman? The church. But it goes on to say in that verse, "And he went to make war with" who? The remnant of her seed. He is in a war against the remnant of the church. And these remnant have two identifying characteristics. They'll be keeping the commandments of God, the verse says, and have the testimony of Jesus Christ. And what is the testimony of Jesus Christ? The spirit of prophecy. Revelation 19:10 tells us that. So these are two identifying characteristics of God's end-time church. But remember, other sheep I have, not of this fold, and they shall hear my voice. Okay? Now this end-time organized body has a special end-time message. Do we understand what that message is? It is a three angels message. Now, we have been given this message over 150 years ago. We have been preaching this message faithfully. Should have been. Should have been. Because what's happening, the dragon or the devil has a voice as well. And we are told that this nation is going to speak as a dragon. God needs a voice in this matter as well. And we are to be that voice. So I ask, when will this message be given? Well, as I mentioned earlier, it should already have been given. We should have been giving this message all along. But when will it be given with a loud cry, the loud voice? I talked about this last time. That is going to be when the national Sunday law is going to be enforced. That's the dragon speaking, but God says, wait, I have a voice in this matter as well. And I have a people who have been preparing themselves to give my message, that they could hear my voice. This is the outpouring of the latter rain. This is the outpouring of God's Holy Spirit. And so I want to ask you, or to have you think to yourself, if we have had this message, and this is the reason that God has raised us up Where do you think you would stand if you were given this message to give to the world and you had not been giving it? I ask the question, do you believe you will receive the outpouring of that latter rain? Now think about these things. No, you won't. James chapter 4 and verse 17 says, "Therefore, to him that knoweth to do good and doeth it not, to him it is" what? It is sin. It is not good that we have been given a message if we have not been giving it. And I share these to you to lead into the first scripture verses I want to share with you. This is found in Matthew chapter 25, verses 1 through 12. We're very familiar with this. I want to turn there and read this to you. Matthew chapter 25, verses 1 through 12. This is the parable of the 10 virgins. It says, "Then shall the kingdom of heaven be likened unto 10 virgins, which took their lamps and went forth to meet the bridegroom. And 5 of them were wise, and 5 were foolish. They that were foolish took their lamps and took no oil with them. But the wise took oil in their vessels with their lamps. While the bridegroom tarried, they all slumbered and slept. And at midnight there was a cry made, Behold, the bridegroom cometh, go ye out to meet him. Then all those virgins arose and trimmed their lamps. And the foolish said unto the wise, Give us your oil, for our lamps are gone out. But the wise answered, saying, Not so, lest there be not enough for us and you, but go rather to them that sell and buy for yourselves. And while they went to buy, the bridegroom came, and they that were ready went in with him in the marriage, and the door was shut. Afterward came also the other virgins, saying, Lord, Lord, open to us. But he answered and said, Verily I say unto you, I know you not." Now, we can think, do we want to be wise or do we want to be foolish? Well, we want to be wise. There's no question about that. But what I had shared with you just before reading this, I wanted to have you think carefully. Because in verse 6 it says, "And at midnight there was a cry made." Midnight represents the darkest time of this earth's history. And this is the time that we're living in now. Gross darkness is covering the earth. The light of God's word has been covered by false doctrines. And so, as we look at this midnight cry, the cry is, Behold, the bridegroom cometh, go ye out to meet him. I want to ask you, who is giving this cry? This cry should be given by us. This is the 3 angels' message that is to be given. This is to be given during this no buy, no sell time period. Those that are wise, I want to present to you, are those of the other sheep I have, not of this fold. Them must I also bring. Because if you think about it, we have known that this has been our message. All along we should have been giving this message. If we are not giving that message, we are really part of the foolish. We will not receive the outpouring of the latter rain. That work should have been done by the early rain to lead us on to be giving that message the whole time that it has been given us to give for over 150 years. It is not wise not to be giving that message. And so I'm sharing these things for a reason. Because that call that we are to give is to come out of her, my people. That is the message. And so now let's turn back a chapter. I want to look at an example in Matthew 24. We're getting to the answer of how long will this last. In Matthew chapter 23, Christ is in the temple, and he is addressing the scribes and the Pharisees, and he is renouncing them. They had failed in their mission to lead God's people. And Christ had let them know in no uncertain terms that they had failed. And so he had turned and he left the temple for the last time. And as he was walking away, I can only imagine in my mind the disciples are saying, what is he doing? How is he going to set up his kingdom upon this earth when he can't even get along with the leaders of our nation? Doesn't he know he needs to just bend a little bit We got to get along. And I'm thinking, because of the scripture verses here, what's going through Christ's mind. It is something totally different. He says, O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, thou that killest the prophets and stonest them which are sent unto thee, how often would I have gathered thy children together, even as a hen gathereth her chickens under her wings, and ye would not. Christ's heart was still going out to his people. His heart was breaking. But he says in the next verse, he says, behold, your house is left unto you desolate. And so as he's walking from the temple down the Kidron Valley, up Mount of Olives, the disciples come to him again, and they're pointing back at the temple, and they're saying, look at this magnificent structure. But Christ needed to draw their minds away from that structure. And so he tells them the very thing they needed to know. He says, I tell you that not one stone shall be left upon another that shall not be thrown down. Because there's going to be no more value in that structure. It's going to be desolate. The very one who fulfilled that sanctuary was sitting right in front of them, and they didn't recognize it. And so he was trying to draw their mind away from this temple. And when they came to him, because he had told them this, that this was going to take place, they said, well, tell us when these things will be. And what shall be the sign of your coming in and the end of the world? Because to them, if this temple was going to be destroyed, this must be the end of the world. And so Jesus took up their question, their twofold question, when will these things be, the destruction of Jerusalem and his sign of his coming and the end of the world? He answered them together. So remember what we're going to read here. This is a dual application. So what is taking place in Jerusalem, or will take place at that time, will be repeated again in the end of this earth's history. And so I want to read 2 verses to you of Matthew chapter 24. Jesus says, when ye therefore shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet stand in the holy place, whoso readeth, let him understand. So Jesus is referring back to a prophecy that Daniel had given. That prophecy was given in Daniel chapter 9 and verse 26, when Daniel prophesied that this destruction of Jerusalem would take place. And we'll go read it in Luke 21, verses 20 and 21 to make this a little clearer. This is the same story, but this is Luke's version of it. He says, and when ye shall see Jerusalem compassed with armies, then know that the desolation therefore is nigh. Then let them which are in Judea flee to the mountains, and let them which are in the midst of it depart out, and let not them that are in the countries enter thereinto. So this, Jesus was saying, when the armies would encompass Jerusalem. And so we know that that did take place. In verse 16 of Matthew 24, it says, then let them which be in Judea flee into the mountains. And so now we need to take our minds back to this time between 34 AD. Once the apostles and Paul the apostle, they went to the world. So from 34 AD to 66 AD, the fall of 66 AD, it was when Cestus, the general of the Roman army, surrounded Jerusalem. This is what Jesus was talking about. This is what took place. But we need to examine what was taking place between 34 AD and 66 AD. This is going to help us to understand how it applies to today. During that time, when you read Paul's writings, I don't care if it's in Ephesus, if he was speaking to the Ephesians, to the Galatians, to the Romans, to the Corinthians, whoever it was, in all of his writings, he had to deal with some issues. There were many Gentiles coming into the Christian faith. There were many of the Jews coming out of, and I want to express this so you understand. Did you know that the Jews were Christians? Many people misunderstand that. Their whole system was set up to focus on worshiping who? Christ. But they had just twisted it. But We call it Judaism just to differentiate between the two. But because of their misunderstanding of the message of Jesus Christ, they were bringing these things into Christianity. They saw that there was no value in the system they used to be in, some, not all. So they were coming into Christianity as well. But they were dragging things into Christianity that was causing confusion with those of the Gentiles that were coming into Christianity. They weren't bringing in the ceremonial laws. They weren't bringing in the holy days as the Jews were, and this was causing confusion and consternation with the Christians. Paul had to deal with these issues. So many of these Christians were kind of balancing, do I have to accept these things into Christianity, circumcision, these ceremonial feast days? And so this was a challenge for them. This was kind of a teetering time. And yet, they were all faithfully taught. They were taught the prophecies of Daniel. And so they knew what was coming. They knew what was coming because Jesus warned them it was coming. So the apostles were faithful in delivering this message to the world. And so in 66 AD, you can read the history from Josephus, the Jewish historian. He talks about this time when the Christians were in the city at this time. And when they saw this fulfillment of the armies circling around, they saw the Roman standard being set up that they were warned about. And they saw, aha, we were warned about that. These people were right because they saw the evidence of it happening. And so as Cestius retreated, these people fled because that's what they were told to do. They were told to flee. So how does that relate to us today? Well, today, if we have been faithfully giving that three angels' messages, if we have been faithfully handing out especially the book, The Great Controversy, which deals with all of these subject matters, there will be many people who have heard these truths for the end time. And many of these people are like, is this right? I know what they're saying, and I see many people doing this, but these people are saying that there's going to be a national Sunday law set up. I've had people tell me, I don't think that's going to be a deal breaker. I've heard many things, but I want to tell you that on our YouTube channel, which we're not big, but we get some views, comments, and people are saying, you know what? God has been showing me something about this Sabbath. I'm not an Adventist, but what you're saying really makes sense. It makes sense. We hear this from many people. And we're on there answering questions and sharing with people. But there are a lot of people that are on this teeter-totter, balancing between what they're saying really isn't that popular. It's not that common. And can they be right? Is this Sabbath issue really right? And so many people are in this balance. But what I think is going to make them make that decision is once they see the actual setting up of this National Sunday law, which we have been telling the world is coming, they're going to say, aha. They're going to hear God's voice that they have been telling me that this is going to come to pass. And here it is. They must be right. They're going to come out. We are to call them out as they see the fulfillment of it. And it's so interesting to note that in 70 AD, when the destruction of Jerusalem took place, what were they celebrating? The Passover. The Passover to them was a sign of their deliverance. And yet Christ had done away with that. The Passover was part of the Old Covenant. It was putting the blood upon the doorposts. Christ fulfilled that. We are now to honor the Lord's Supper. We are to apply the blood to the heart. And so as the Passover was a sign of their deliverance, even before the destruction, the whole world is going to hold on to this Sunday. They're going to say, you guys need to stop honoring the seventh-day Sabbath and honor the Sunday Sabbath. Because of what you're doing is causing all these calamities and these plagues to fall upon us. They're holding onto that as their deliverance. And so we're going to see a repeat again of history. And so I share these things with you to help us to understand these are the events that are going to be taking place during this no buy, no sell time. We are going to be giving this message. There are going to be many people in the land of decision, and they're going to come out. And I want to touch more on that. When they come out, what do we need to do? But I want to read to you verses 21 and 22, and this is going to answer the question, how long will this be? Verses 21 and 22, it says, "For then shall be great tribulation, such as was not since the beginning of the world, to this time, no, nor ever shall be. And except those days shall be shortened, there should no flesh be saved, but for the elect's sake, those days shall be shortened." So we saw in Jerusalem and its destruction, it was in the fall of 66 AD until the destruction in 70 AD. It was 3.5 years. Now, Jesus said, because the way things are going to be, he says, I'll have to shorten that time. So it won't be 3.5 years, but how much will it be shortened? I don't know. Will it be a year? Will it be 2 years? I'm not sure. But all I'm sharing this for is to help you to understand what we're going to be doing during this time, and how long will it be, because it's going to change the thoughts of our preparation. If this is going to be 1 year or 2 years, we know we're going to have to make some preparations that are going to be more long-term. We can't just bear down and grit it out until it's over. That's not going to work. But really, this is in connection, what I want to share with you, really bringing together the spiritual and the practical. Again, Jesus was our example. And I want to read to you, and we'll stay in Matthew 25. And we're going to look at verses 34 through 40. These are my last scripture verses. And this really is the fulfillment of the spiritual with the practical. This is what's going to be taking place during this last time period of Earth's history. It says, "Then shall the king say unto them on his right hand, Come, ye blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungered, and ye gave me meat. I was thirsty, and ye gave me drink. I was a stranger, and ye took me in. Naked, and ye clothed me. I was sick, and ye visited me. I was in prison, and ye came unto me. Then shall the righteous answer him, saying, Lord, when saw we thee an hungered, and fed thee, or thirsty, and gave thee drink? When saw we thee a stranger, and took thee in, or naked, and clothed thee? Or when saw we thee sick, or in prison, and came unto thee? And the king shall answer and say unto them, Verily I say unto you, inasmuch as ye have done it unto the one of the least of these my brethren, ye have done it unto me." This is how we can comfort the Lord. And this is the things that are going to be taking place during this no buy, no sell time period. There's going to be great persecution. But what God is waiting is for a visible manifestation of His character to be reproduced in His people. That's what He's waiting for. So these verses tell us what work we shall be doing, and there's a lot of practical work involved with this. And I'm going to use this as a miniature example. You look at the country of Ukraine. What's going on there? Many people are leaving that nation. There are bombings. There are people who don't have homes. They're fleeing that country. They need practical things. They need shelter. They need food. They need water. They need medical attention. So preparing to have these things is not a lack of faith, because this is just a miniature scale of what's coming. What's coming is going to be a worldwide event. There are going to be many people who have practical needs. And if we are willing to give of ourselves, if we're willing to give of our belongings to benefit these people, that is the spiritual and the practical brought together. And that work begins now, not just the physical preparation and learning these things, but the spiritual. The spiritual and the practical must be brought together. And as it's brought together, you think about it, it says, when you have done it unto the least of these, my brethren, you have done it unto me. This is the fulfilling of the commandments of God. You are demonstrating love to the neighbor, and in doing so, you are demonstrating love to God. This is the fulfillment of the commandments. Love is the fulfilling of the law. God is love. That's how we fulfill the law. We allow that love to be perfectly demonstrated in our own lives. And so this is the preparation that must be done. There must be practical skills along with the gospel experience. So now we're going to get into more of the practical, but we needed to tie in the spiritual. You cannot separate the two. And I want to say that Danna and I, so you know, this is the first time we have taught any of this. And so, a seminar anyway, we've taught individual classes with these things, but to put it together as a seminar, so you are our first trial to do this, so please bear with us. But I guess if I'm going to say we are qualified for this is because we have had the great privilege and opportunity to live this lifestyle. And so, but we didn't live it during a time when we couldn't buy or sell. So there is a difference. If we had it in need and we didn't have it, we could go get it. But we're not going to have that opportunity. When Danna and I first moved to Kentucky, we decided to build our own house. And so we learned the skills to do that. We learned a lot, and it was such a blessing. But in that whole process, well, we didn't have running water for a while. We didn't have electricity for a while. So a lot of these things we're going to teach you, we had to live. So we can tell you from firsthand, it really was a blessing. It really was. You learn to appreciate things in such a way that you don't. We take things for granted. We flip a switch or we lift a knob and we've got everything we want. But we have to have a different mindset. And so we're going to look at some things that will help us to get through this time, because remember again, this is going to be a worldwide event. There's going to be calamities, disasters, diseases. People have practical needs. And if we are not prepared, we're going to be scrambling for our own selves to get through this time. So the better prepared we are, the better help we can be for those who truly didn't know our message and didn't have the opportunity to prepare. So we're going to stop here. We're going to take a break, get out, stretch, get some fresh air, get some water, and then we'll come back. Grab our seats. And I want to take this opportunity to let you know that if you have a question while we're presenting, just please raise your hand. Or even if you have a comment, you might have experience in something that we're talking about that would be helpful. Please raise your hand and wait for a microphone to get to you. Brother Champion has a microphone because this is being recorded, and we want others here also to hear your question. So if we answer that question, so everybody will be able to hear. So please just raise your hand, and let's get to our seats and we'll get started.
Okay, I want you to take just a minute. I want you to take a minute and think about, when was the last time you went to town to buy stuff? Last week? Walmart, Lowe's, grocery store, Home Depot. What are the things that we most commonly buy when we go, say, to Walmart? Food? Things that perish with the using. Think about paper goods, paper towels. Think about matches. You use them and they're done, right? What about Band-Aids? You use them and they're done. You don't reuse Band-Aids, right? Think about shoelaces. I have a shoelace that's about to break on one of my boots here. But I'm cheap, so I'm waiting until it breaks to replace it. But I have a pair. What are some things that you think you really need on an ongoing basis that you would not be able to buy under no buy, no sell? Anybody? Q-tips, good one. Okay. What will you do when you can't buy Q-tips? What's that? A twig? Oh, ouch. Okay. What will you do, ladies? Let's just be practical here. When your monthly time comes and you can't buy the female products. We're being very practical. Well, we're all grown-ups here. We're except the ones, and they don't really have a clue what we're talking about anyway. Think about those things. What are you planning to do when you cannot buy and replace those things? We're not going to buy enough paper towels to last us through this time. Not very practical. We're not going to buy enough toilet paper to last us through this time. So what can we do practically to prepare for those kind of things that perish with the using? I heard somebody say soap, shampoo. What are you going to do when you can't buy it? How are you going to clean yourself? These are very practical questions. Can you see how real this is going to get when we cannot buy these things? So we need to start thinking about what we can do to replace these things. Of course, we didn't used to use throwaway paper towels. What did we use? We used, strips of sheets or whatever, and maybe Mom would serge the edge, and we would just wash them. Well, how are you going to wash when you can't buy soap? So these are very practical questions. To some degree, we can stock up on some of these things. We can learn to make them. We need to be able to find in nature the things that we need to replace what we use on a day-to-day basis. There is a plant. It grows here. I've seen it in the woods on Yuchi Pines. It's called the yucca. Who knows what the yucca plant is? That is a very useful plant. It can be used for cordage. It can be used for fire starting. The root has something called saponins in them. It can be used as a soap. Okay? So God has not left us without resources in nature. We just have to learn to identify and use these things. Not only that, the yucca plant has on the stem, the stalk that comes up, it grows these beautiful white flowers, and if you've never eaten those white flowers on a yucca plant, when they're just fresh, just open, they are absolutely scrumptious. They taste like sunflower seeds. And so learn these plants. Plant these things in your yard, on your property, if you have a property. So, I just want you to think through how many times were you dependent on electricity, getting ready just today to come to this meeting. Ladies, did you blow dry your hair? Did you turn on a curling iron? How did you warm your food for breakfast? Or did you? How did you illuminate your room? How will you do that when you can't pay your electric bill? I think that we need to really think very candidly about these things. Where is your water going to come from? And water is one that my husband and I really, the experience that he and I had in Kentucky was my second experience living off-grid, so to speak. I lived that way for almost 3 years when I first moved to Kentucky. We had no indoor plumbing and no running water. And it was a challenge, but it was a blessing. It was a huge blessing. And so when we get to the part where we're going to talk about sanitation, I'll share more of that with you. But I just want you to think about these things. Where would I get my water from if I couldn't pay the electricity to run my water pump? Or if I couldn't pay my water bill to get municipal water? So my husband and I are going to go through what we know as survival priorities. And these are priorities for us right now, and they're going to be priorities for us when we cannot buy and sell, and they're going to be priorities for us when we move right into the wilderness experience. Okay? So these are things that are not going to leave us. They're things that we're going to need to learn to supply the need of in any situation. Okay, my husband is going to write on the whiteboard, and I'm going to ask you, what do you think is the most important priority for survival on a day-to-day, in the no-buy-no sale, and when we go to the wilderness? Yes. Okay, he says water. Where's our microphone, our roving microphone? Okay, if you could, if you have an answer, raise your hand, and Brother Champion will put the microphone on you so that those who are listening online now or later on YouTube can hear. So he said water. There are 5 things. I see a hand in the back. I think she said
A shelter?
shelter. Is that what she said? Okay, so
Shelter is number 1.
yes. Bing. Okay, yes.
Food?
Food. Okay, that is one of the top 5. Okay, so we have water.
We're going to fill them in, but there is an order in priority that we want to put them.
Where's your microphone? He's not using his mic.
I tell everybody to speak into it, and we want to keep them in order of priority. Shelter is number 1, and once we get the 5 up here, we'll tell you why they're in that priority order.
Okay, shelter's number 1. You said water.
My son, what you saying, kid? Who's number 1? What's number 1? God. You said God.
God.
Number 1.
Yes.
Amen.
Amen. Out of the mouth of little babies. Okay, that's overarching it all. Okay, so we have shelter, we have water, and we have food. Those are the 3 that have been named so far. Okay? What's that? I can't hear you. I see people, but what I need you to do is raise your hand. Brother Champion will put the microphone in your face so we can all hear you.
We did have food, correct? Okay.
We did have food. Okay, yes.
Medicine.
Okay, that's a very good one, and that is actually priority number 3. And it's not, we don't necessarily call it medicine, we call it health concerns. Okay? So what's missing from this list? What's that? Heat. Okay, he said heat.
Heat. We
I will
call
accept
it
that. We call it fire.
fire.
Yes. When you turn on your light switch, that's fire. That's from electricity. So somebody, somewhere, there's some fire, there's some power. Okay? So even today, we turn on the electric furnace, we turn on the electric stove to heat our food, to heat our homes. That's fire. That can be met by fire. Okay, we're going to break these down a little bit, and I think this is the order of priority. With the shelter, we're coming into the summer months now. Let me ask you a question, and raise your hand if you think you know. How cold of a temperature can you handle at night and not freeze to death if you don't have adequate shelter? Anybody want to venture a guess? There's a hand.
30 degrees.
About 30 degrees, he says.
Yeah, about 30 degrees.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay. She said she thinks it depends on your health. That is a good point. Do you know that you can freeze to death if it's 60 degrees outside? You can freeze to death in 60 degrees. You can die of exposure, hypothermia. Okay? So don't think that just because we're praying that our flight be not in the winter or on the Sabbath, that we won't have to deal with this issue of shelter and the need for warmth, even in the summer. I have a hand here.
Yes, my question is, why is that at 60 degrees? Can you explain that?
Yes, because just think about it. If you're laying on the ground, that earth is pulling heat out of your body. If you sweat and your clothing is wet and you don't dry that out and you're trying to sleep at night and you don't have adequate shelter, the heat is just leaving your body. Okay? You have to be able to maintain your core body temperature. And whatever the temperature is outside, if you don't have adequate clothing and you don't have that metabolism in place, your body core temperature is going to go down, yes.
One thing that people tend to forget is wind, too.
Yes, good point. We forget about the wind. The wind, and if you're from North Dakota, you know that's an issue, right, Brother Marvin? Yes. Wind is definitely an issue. It will take the heat right out of you. So, even in warmer months, we need to always keep these things in mind. The number one priority, if you find yourself in a survival situation, now what we're talking about is not necessarily survival, wilderness survival, although we are going to introduce some of those things. That's not the purpose of this seminar. We're simply trying to show you some things that we believe that you need to be thinking about when you cannot buy anything, when you cannot pay your bills, okay? Things, equipment that you need to have in place now. We have a little window of opportunity, and I believe that window is getting smaller by the day to purchase some key items that we're going to need for what's ahead of us. Okay, so priority number 1 is shelter. Priority 2 is water, health concerns, fire, and then food. Were you going to say something?
And we're going to break this shelter down. Most of us, when we think of shelter, we think of a physical structure. But it's more than that. And we're going to break it down into 3 areas. One is the structure itself, which I'm going to talk to you a little bit. But also, when we talk of shelter, we all also need to consider clothing. Clothing is a part of our shelter protection. My wife is going to talk about that. And then there is also bedding.
I just want to say a quick praise the Lord, because they were given rain in the forecast all day today and all day tomorrow. So I just rejoice that the sunshine is coming out. So praise the Lord for that. Okay, let's talk a little bit now. I'm going to spend the first one on clothing, because this is our first barrier, right? This is the first thing that we have to maintain that core body temperature. I just want to show a few things, and I think that probably the two most important items that I have first are your feet and your head. Yeah. Always make sure that you have a good, warm wool. We call them togies in Kentucky. Make sure you got a good togie, a good stocking hat, okay? These are merino wool. I purchased some of my wool things from a company called Mountain Warehouse. They have good products, but I found better wool products at a company called Meri Wool, M-E-R-I wool, W-O-O-L. Now, why do I like wool so much? I like to try as much as possible to stick with natural fibers, cotton, linen, wool, these types of things. Wool will actually insulate you even if it's wet, okay? So, we try really hard not to get wet, and if we do get wet, we want to dry out. And that's why, if I could just interject this here, if you, for instance, if this is going to be in your backpack, I have my extra clothing in a dry bag, so that if I fall in a creek or something, my clothing stays dry, my extra clothing, because you really need to keep your feet especially dry and warm. These are actually military socks. I'm wearing a pair. This is another pair. Do you remember the name brand of these? There is one name brand. It's called Darn Tough, like you darn socks. Darn Tough socks. They are really good socks. They're thick. They have ladies' socks that come all the way up to the knee, which I prefer. And so if y'all want to look at these, I can pass it around if that's an interest. If you don't feel like you need that, that's fine. I'll just leave them up here. You can see them later. Okay, but it says Omni Wool on these socks. Omni Wool. Now, when you consider your socks, I really only wear boot socks. If you want to get those little ankle things, that's your business. But to me, that ain't a sock. Okay, a sock comes up to my knee. And so that's my personal preference. I feel like it gives me better protection. Whenever I get my socks, I'm going to wear them inside my boots. So footwear is not something that I chintz on. Okay, these boots right here were, when I bought them about 9 years ago, 8 or 9 years ago, I think they were $185. These are military grade. This is what the soldiers use. These have 200 grams of insulation, and they're also waterproof. I've been in water up above the ankle, and they don't leak. These are very good boots. These are made by Belleville. They have the Vibram outsole, and I am telling you, I have put some serious abuse on these boots, and they have taken it. They've stood up to this. The only thing that I regret, I bought them larger than what I actually wear a 7.5. I bought an 8. If I did it over, I would buy an 8.5, because I'm going to put thick, heavy socks in there. Okay. And all my life growing up as a kid, I just knew I wore a 6.5 or 7. And then I would cram my socks in there and my feet would freeze. Even with nice warm socks and nice insulated boots, my feet were still cold. It was because I was buying my boots too small. You want to buy your boots at least a size larger. Some people buy them 2 sizes larger. That's a little much for me, but a good pair of thick, heavy wool boot socks and a good pair of heavy boots. I do have a pair of ladies' boots up here that I bought off of eBay. They were supposed to be a wide, and they were not, and I have wide feet. So if anybody wears a narrow, I have these for $35. They're not insulated, but they are waterproof. And these are also made by Belleville. These are excellent boots. They're just too narrow for me. Okay, so the head and the feet, you want to make sure that you have something wool, very good quality. This is not a place to chintz. Is this stuff expensive? Yep. I ain't going to lie to you. It's not cheap. But just think about if I'm in a situation where I can't buy anything anymore, I might buy 3 pairs of Walmart underwear, long underwear, for the price that I could pay for one of these shirts from Mary Wool. But this thing is going to last, and it's going to keep me warm even if I sweat. Now here in Alabama, we have that damp cold. Y'all know what I'm talking about, right? I've lived in North Dakota with my husband, and that's a seriously different kind of cold up there, okay? You cannot put enough on to stay out for any length of time without having to come in and warm up. It just gets crazy cold up there. But down here, where we have that cold, humid, wet, damp weather in the winter, I have worn this right here. I bought this one from, I think this came from Mountain Warehouse. It's a little bit thinner. I had this one on, and I had a polypropylene jacket, zip jacket, something similar to this right here. Okay? It was like in the low 30s, upper 20s outside, and we were outside working, and I was sweating. Okay? With just 3 layers. and a very light coat. Okay, so layers matter. And Mary wool is one of the best quality that I have found. I think a top like this is around $60. Okay, and they also have the bottoms. They have them for ladies. They have them for men. The waistband I like. It's covered. It's nice and easy. It doesn't choke you to death. And so these are Mary wool. I think these are the mid-grade, mid-weight long john bottoms. Okay, and if you put a pair of these on and say maybe a pair of scrub pants or khaki pants or even blue jeans on under your skirt, ladies. I always wear a skirt, so I can really hide a lot of stuff under a skirt. I guarantee you I'm warmer than you fellas wearing pants, because I can hide lots of layers under there. So anyway, so those are some layers. If you want to look at these, you're welcome to. I like always to have something around my neck, and I just tie it, and then I've always got a scarf if I need to gather some berries, if I need to filter some water, or if I get something my husband gets something in his eye, I can wet the corner and dig it out or whatever. These are just so useful. Doesn't have to be camo or whatever, but just a simple bandana, something like that. Very, very useful piece of clothing, okay? So I like to keep one of those. And then, of course, particularly if you're going to be working around any of these other things that we're going to talk about, you want a nice pair, excuse me, of leather gloves. Okay, these kind here, these are okay for like gardening and stuff, but you touch something hot with it, what's going to happen? It's going to melt, and that stuff's going to melt right to your skin, and that is not going to be, then you're going to have an injury to deal with, okay? So I don't recommend depending on these kinds of gloves when I can't replace it. These leather gloves are going to outlast these by far. These are nice for gardening. They keep your fingers, from getting wet so much and stuff. They have their place. But if I only have one pair of gloves, it's going to be a pair of leather gloves. They don't have to be white, but that's what they had at the store. Okay, were you going to say something?
I was going to say gloves too. I'm a glove guy. Like women are shoe people probably, but there's a glove for every occasion. And I think of gloves, when I'm sharpening knives or using knives or axes. And one big thing I would recommend, because we're going to be outdoors, is seriously, get a pair of gloves, because you have no idea how many little cuts you can get that can get infected. You have no idea when you're reaching into the wood piles to grab out this wood, what could be in there. Brown recluse, black widow. It would save you from many, many, many things. So please consider gloves. Very good. Very important.
Okay, another thing that I think that we need to always be thinking ahead, because once we go into the no buy, no sell time frame, if you don't have what you need when it's time to hit the woods, it's too late. So if you're going to get that stuff, you're going to need to get it now while we can buy and sell. I do have a rain suit that has pants and it has a jacket. Now, I intend during no buy or no sell, or when we have to flee to the wilderness, I intend that my legs are going to be covered, well covered, okay? So, and then I have a rain jacket that just, I don't want to unroll it too much because it never goes back in the bag quite the same way. But I do want to show you this. This is a military rain poncho. Honey, will you do the honors? Now I'm going to make some noise on my microphone here, but this is actually not the military grade. The actual military grade I can't wear. Can y'all still hear me? Why can't I wear it? Y'all see where this one comes on me? I'm like 5'1", and I'm stepping on this thing. Okay, so a poncho like this, I would have to put some paracord or something and kind of hike it up a little bit. Otherwise, I'm going to break my neck stepping on this thing. Okay, that's why I went ahead personally and got, the poncho and the pants, because a lot of people recommend these military rain ponchos, and we do have the actual military grade ones. I don't know where they are, but at any rate, if you're short like me, that's going to be tough to wear. You would break your neck stepping on it. Amelia, you guys would have the same problem as me. So anyway, they are a good and valuable piece of equipment though, because you can use these for shelter. There's so many ways you can tie up a military poncho to make shelter. So it is a good item to have. Just know that you need to test your gear out before you actually need it. And while I'm talking about that, if you're going to get a good pair of hiking boots, and I like the military boots for that purpose. I don't know where that came from. That's in there. Don't buy these and put them in the closet and then pull them out when you need to run to the wilderness. Because you need to make sure that they're not going to cause a blister on you anywhere. Make sure that they're going to fit you well. Don't chintz on your footwear. These boots that I'm wearing right now, I looked them up and I think they sell for almost $350. There's a military surplus store in Columbus, Georgia, not too far from here. I paid $50 for these boots, and they look brand new when I bought them. If anybody wants to go there, we can make arrangements to take some folks there one day. You can get wool blankets, which I'm going to talk about in just a minute. You can get these kind of boots, all kind of stuff that you can gear up with for way better prices if you don't mind using used equipment. Since I mentioned blisters, you want to make sure that you have some kind of treatment for a blister, because a blister, particularly if it gets infected, will put you out of commission. You're not going anywhere. I'm serious. It may seem like a small thing, but if you've never had a blister, a serious blister on your foot from ill-fitting shoes, it's not something you want to experience when you need to be on the move. Okay? So make sure that you have that. Okay, that's basically it for clothing that I wanted to cover. But now I want to cover a little bit on bedding. Again, if I could only have 2 bedding items that I could take with me to the wilderness that I would also use during no buy no sale, it would be a wool blanket and some type of tarp. This is actually an emergency blanket that could be used as a tarp. Okay? But we also have a free soldier tarp. We can open these up if you want to look at these later. Think about some tarp to keep yourself dry. And again, wool blankets will insulate even when they're wet. Another thing that I like about wool is they are fire resistant. They're not fireproof. But my love affair with polypropylene is kind of limited, because if you sit next to a campfire with this, what's going to happen in short order is it's going to be full of holes, full of little burn holes, and it could catch fire. Yes. So I am steering more and more away from these synthetic things to natural fibers. Okay, it's not easy to do. It's a process. You see all this stuff we've got. We've been buying and testing gear for 7 years, I think. Yeah. And so hopefully the things that we've learned will help you not to make some of the mistakes that we've made. But this is not a mistake. A good military grade wool blanket, if you want us to go with you, or you can, what's the name of the place?
Tier 1.
Tier 1 military surplus. And there are others. It's out Victory Drive, right?
I don't know all my roads yet,
think
but
it's
I
out
can
there.
drive you
If y'all
there.
want to go, just let us know, and we'll arrange a day that we'll lead a convoy out there. $15. $15 for one of these. It's a very good investment. We bought several of them. Okay, if you, let's just say you're on the move and all you have is your wool blanket and your tarp. You could lay down your tarp, lay down the wool blanket in there, and wrap yourself in like make a human burrito. Just kind of wrap yourself in like a burrito. You'll stay warm and you'll stay dry. And shelter is very vital for survival. So, okay, I think my husband is going to talk a little bit more about the actual physical shelter now.
And just so we're clear again, we're talking about no buy, no sell when we still can be in our homes. But there's going to be areas where we're going to have to know these wilderness skills. Because remember, we have been counseled to move to the country. We should be living in the country, and the people that we need to reach are going to be living where? The majority of them. In the city. And so we're going to have to travel to them. We're not going to have vehicles to travel there. So we're going to have to hike. So we're going to need these little shelters as well to get us through. And what I want to look at is the actual physical structure. Now, that can be anything, and I'll tell you, my great-grandparents, when they came from Germany to this country, on their travels out here, they had to tip their wagon over and live under their wagon in North Dakota. Part of that was in the winter, and if you've not been to North Dakota, I know Brother Marvin has. Yeah. It was a rough life. You know, we have to make adjustments to live this way, but that's how they lived. You know, we just have all the conveniences. But, and then my grandparents, they graduated from a wagon to a empty railroad boxcar. They didn't have running water, didn't have electricity. And so you can see that you can find physical structures in many places. And so I don't know how many of you own your own property and have your own homes. There may be some of you who don't. And so we want to be thinking in the lines, what would be the best option for me? Now, my wife and I, we used to have property, we used to have a farm, and we used to have camp meetings and do these things. But we don't now, and we're looking at being mobile. We're getting invitations to go here, there to speak, and so we're thinking of getting an RV. That could be an option. But we may need a place to park that. And so we're keeping in contact with friends who may have land that if we need to go somewhere, we would have a place to go. So we were thinking, as a people, this preparation is a must, really, because if you don't have property, I don't know very many of you, as a matter of fact, I don't know if any of you do or not, but what we want to let you know is that if we don't have property, we need to find maybe a portable option. That's why we brought this tent. We want you to look at this tent, this very portable. But when we go to a property, we want to make sure that we are an asset, not a liability. And so if we can provide our own shelter, if we know how to live with the few necessities of life and not be a burden to others, that's the goal. We want to be an asset, not a liability. That's why we're teaching these things. You may have to go to somebody else's property. And so we want to give you options to think about. The tent was one that we invested in, again, because we don't have a property. So we're thinking of the RV. We've got our tent already. But what other options do you think there are when you think of a physical structure? Now remember, this is probably for a year or two. We don't know exactly how long it will be. So when you think of, and we brought another little tent, a microfiber tent, to show you the difference. And you can tell us which one you'd rather live in. But what other options do you think there are? Anybody have any other ideas? A lean-to. A lean-to could definitely be an option, because you think about the times that we're going to be living in are going to be very difficult times. We may be very happy for a lean-to, just to keep the rain off of us. And it depends what climate you're living in. You may need to shelter that lean-to in. But there are other options too. Our friends, the Bullers, they teach how to build shelters. Now they're more temporary, but they can be for a year or two. But they teach how to build teepees, yurts. Yurts are an option. People live in yurts up in Alaska. There are these pods you can rent. I've seen people turn them into homes. Now they're not as practical if you need to move them, but they're a quick way to set up a shelter. And again, the RV. But one thing that Danna and I, whatever you choose, we recommend in whatever aspect of this preparation work is to get yourself good tools. Don't buy cheap tools. Buy a tool that's going to last. Talk to people who do this kind of thing, who work with tools if you don't know what tools to get. Because you don't have to buy the most expensive tool. They're not always the best tool. But get a good quality tool, just like clothing. Get good quality clothing. And you're going to have to get used to it. Brother Marvin, I remember your testimony at Sabbath. You said, they wanted me to dig all them holes? Yeah. We're going to have to get blisters. We're going to have to do some physical work because we won't have electricity. Now, I will say this. When we built our home, we did build in a solar system. And we had our own well. And we're going to talk about that more when we get to water. And so, if you have a solar system, a property with a solar system, wonderful. I don't know how long that's going to last because the components can break down, but if you have it, use it. And so I'll be honest, I'm looking at something more portable because the work I do besides our ministry work, which really is part of our ministry, is I do handyman work, I do carpentry work, electrical, plumbing, so I need tools. And so I'm looking at buying a solar generator, something that can charge my batteries for my tools. Again, I don't know how long that will last. It will break down, but you're much safer if you just get hand tools. So start thinking of getting hand tools for every aspect of country living. We're going to talk more about other hand tools, but we're talking specifically for a physical structure because you can build your own structure as well, but you're going to need hand tools. And we've got some over here. Tomorrow I'm going to be talking more about these things. These are tools that you should acquire, axes, hatchets. We've got also these saws that fold down to just slimline. But you're going to need whatever tools you would need, hammers, screwdrivers, different things to build a physical structure. But thinking in that term, if I don't have a piece of property, what is my best option? Because you're going to need someplace to stay. And also you want to be an asset, not a liability. And so tomorrow, or matter of fact, I think today, we're going to go out to the tent after we're done in here, and we're going to look at the tent. So if you have questions, prices, sizes, the company, or whatever, feel free to ask us. But this is an option that's one we brought, but you can think, what shelter would work for me? If you already have a home, wonderful. Then get the hand tools that you're going to need for the different things that gardening or whatever. But remember, we're also here not just for ourselves. We're going to have to take people into our homes as well. We may need to build a shelter for them or open our home for them. So with that mindset, you can see that you're still, even if you have your own home, you're going to need tools. You will need them. So invest in good tools. Did you have anything else on shelter?
I just wanted to add, when the time comes when we may have to go to somebody else's property, every family needs their privacy. I don't care how good of a friend you are. The time is going to come when their family needs to be a family. When my family needs to be a family. We need to have those discussions that, you really don't want other ears to hear or what have you. And so I personally believe that we should not plan to just pile into our friend's house. If we can take this first priority of shelter with us, so that we're more of an asset than a liability. That we can take skills. Knowledge weighs nothing. And if we learn how to do stuff, we can really be an asset to our friends when we show up there knowing how to garden, knowing how to forage for food in the wilderness, knowing how to identify herbs, wild edibles and medicinals. By the way, I brought this. I'm going to just pass this around because the last time we were here, I wanted to show you guys this. And this is all over the place. All of your, if you walk down this row here, there's a whole bunch of oak trees. Especially after a good rain, you'll see this lichen on here. This lichen is called usnea. And I have a video on usnea on our YouTube channel. And if you've not become acquainted with usnea, this is called nature's doxycycline. And if I had known when I got Rocky Mountain spotted fever about this stuff, I don't think I ever would have gotten as sick as I did. So become acquainted, and we'll just pass it around so everybody can kind of look at it. I'm not going to go into key identification features because it is on that video. So I think next we're supposed to talk about water. You want to go ahead and go into this?
Yeah, and so now we're going to talk about water. Now again, if you have your own property, you probably have a water supply, but think, even if you have your own property and you have your water supply, where will you get your water if you don't have electricity? Does anybody have any thoughts? Microphone? Raise your hand.
I know when we had our place out there in Miller, Tennessee, one of the ideas that I thought of was catching rainwater.
Very good, catching rainwater. So that brings up another thing. If you're going to catch rainwater, you're going to need something to gather it in, right? So we're going to need containers as well to gather that water. Yes?
A well or spring.
A well or a spring, very good. Now, if you have a well, you're going to need electricity to get that water out of a well. And if you have a solar system, again, that will work. But a spring, if you know how to develop a spring, you don't need electricity for that. It will run and it will flow. And the idea is if you have a property with the spring above your home, that would be ideal. And it can flow into your home. So it might be a good practical skill to know how to develop a spring. Or if you don't have a property and you're looking for a property, one of the number one priorities for finding a property is water.
Another thing to remember, if you do have a spring head that's up on a hill, sometimes you can develop what's called a ram pump that does not run on electricity, and it can actually pump water. If there's not too much head, it can actually pump uphill. Another point that I wanted to bring out about the well, when we had our farm in Kentucky, we of course were off grid. We had a solar system, and the solar system would run our well pump. But we also put what was called a simple pump down in that well, which is a hand pump. Okay, now let me just give you a reality check on this hand pump thing. Whenever we would have guests, this was before we got the electricity, they'd be in there just running the water and washing the dishes, and I'm standing there, and I would run outside and pump water. And I would come back in, and they're running the water, and I'm like, pump, 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 run back in, and they're doing stuff, and I'm back and forth with these guests who had no clue what they were doing. Every single drop is precious. My husband, he's got bigger muscles than me. He would take 5-gallon buckets and go dip out of the creek and put up on the porch to flush our toilets. We didn't dare flush the toilet with water that we had to pump. And here's some perspective. Ladies, give me a guesstimate here of how many loads of laundry you do in 1 week. In a day. My sister had 7 kids. She called her laundry Mount Washmore. So I would really, with my husband doing carpentry and stuff, I had to wash every day. 1 load of laundry, 1,000 strokes on that simple pump. I got tired of pumping water. So we got a well pump. So that is reality, okay? That is reality. You use a lot more water than you think you do. And so one of the things that I believe we can start doing now is training ourselves to be a little more conservative with water. We are very wasteful. Who are we to think that we really deserve a hot shower 15-minute long, 10-minute long? This is just not reality for most of the world, okay? We laugh, but it's true. We have become very spoiled with our lavish water use, okay? So we really need to think about, how much water we really need, okay?
And that's why we're having this, because it's planting seeds. It takes a different mindset. It really does. And for me, I would watch people, they wanted to help us, and so they're doing dishes for us, and they're leaving the water run, and I would go over and turn it off, and they would look at me, and I'm like, you want to go out there and pump a while? Yeah. But anyway, you can get a simple pump. Now, a simple pump is the one that we got. They're very expensive, but they're high quality. But they're not meant to supply a house with water. That's not their purpose. Their purpose is for emergency uses. Now, you can find other well pumps, hand pumps, that are designed for more amounts of water. Look for those. If you do have a well, like you mentioned, sister, I take that back. You don't need electricity. I forgot about the hand pump that we used to have. Yeah. So
and you can draw it out with a bucket, but hey, you better have some muscles. Or you better have a pulley system set up. Because when I was a kid and we first moved to the farm, we had I don't think it was about a 2-gallon bucket, something like that. And you start lifting 2 gallons from down in a well, how much does a gallon of water weighs? 8 pounds, right? So you start pulling that up like this, you better have some serious shoulders, because by the time you get about halfway, your arms are going to be trembling, okay? So we're spoiled, y'all. We're spoiled, okay?
And if you are looking to get a property and you want a well, there is different wells that you can get. A drilled well is typically a 6-inch casing where you would need a pump, whether it be hand or electric. You can also get a bored well. They can make them bigger, and they're not as deep. But that, then you may have to purify. And I really had a great privilege, too, staying with my grandmother. She didn't have indoor plumbing. We had to haul water to the house. My aunt was the same way. So we got to learn that you had to go get what you were going to drink. And you didn't have a toilet in the house. You went out to the outhouse. And so those were all good skills as a young boy that I got to experience. And those times are coming back again, but we want to make it, I don't want to say as easy as we can, but you know what? The times that are coming are going to be difficult enough. The more prepared we are, the less stress it will be on us. And again, there are others who did not know to prepare. We need to be ready for them as well. So other places we can get water is a creek. We had a creek, and that's where I gathered our water for our toilet. I would go out with the buckets and scoop them up, set them on the porch, and as we would need them, we'd dump them in the tank. We did have a toilet, but we just didn't have running water. And we could still flush it because we had a septic system plumbed in. But anyway, you could have ponds. Okay, but then we get to the point of purification. If we want to drink this water, how are we going to purify it? I hear something. Raise your hand. We'll get a microphone.
You could get a potable filter. They have this filter that I saw online.
Okay.
Water.
Filters. Speaking of filters, now has anybody heard of the Berkey filter system? The Berkey waters? Yeah. Wonderful systems. And those are an option. But if you're going to do it, I would suggest do it now and get the larger one that you can get. We had just ordered filters, fluorine and charcoal filters for ours, and the prices are going up. So get extras. Again, we don't know how long this is going to be, but that is a great option. You can put that water in there. It will take out certain contaminants, but still Depending where you get your water from, you still may have to do further purification, but that is a good option. Yes. Okay, microphone, and then we will show you. We want to get to that too. So the Berkey is more of a home system, but again, we may be traveling to the cities. We're going to need other options. Yes.
Yes, I was about to say they also have some straw that are like filtering. Yes, this one.
There are life straws. Now, we have several examples. Do you have that? Oh, here. This is a Katahdin. This one can handle up to 13,000 gallons. It has a ceramic filter, and it's unique, if you want to open that up. It works the same as these other life straws. You can take these and stick them right in the water wherever you are, and you can drink right out of these. You can also put water in these. There's filters in these. It's a Sawyer water bottle. Now, I'm not too favorable in this because it's plastic. But anyway.
I forgot to bring my stainless steel water bottle. I know some of y'all have them. If you get a stainless steel water bottle, make sure that it's not insulated. You want a single wall, because then you can purify your water in a campfire in that stainless steel water bottle. Okay, if it's insulated, you'll ruin it. You can't do that. Okay.
And I think that is the safest method, as my wife was saying. Get containers, boil your water, bring it to boiling. You don't have to boil it for any amount of time. Just bring it to boil, and it will purify the water. But this, I mentioned and I want to show you because this is a very good option, not for a household again, but if you are traveling anywhere with however many people.
Hose.
But anyway, if you want to hold that, there is a hose that attaches to the top here. This, it has a float and a weight into it. So you just simply drop it in the water, and this you pump. It's very smooth pumping. Again, 13,000 gallons it can go through, but it depends, how contaminated the water is that you're using. And then this hooks to the top of it, and you can fill it into any container and drink out of it. And Katahdin is the brand. But there are many others. There's Sawyer, there's the mini life straws. You can come up and look at them later too. We have other examples up here. But when it comes to water, we know that we can only go for just a few days at the most, depending on the climate, without drinking water. So we need to make sure that we understand how to have good drinking water. But water is used in so many aspects of our lives. You think of bathing, and bathing is very important because it helps to control the temperature of your body. So having clean skin, but wound care, to wash out wounds, cooking, toiletry, washing clothes. There's a lot of reasons for needing water. I was surprised when I saw how many gallons we use in a month when I used to live in the city. Thousands of gallons. We don't even think of it. But those things are going to change, and so we need to be as conservative as we can. And we're going to talk separately in our next section here. We're going to take a break after this, and when we come back, we're going to talk about bathing, wound care, how to do this with minimal amounts of water. So water is a great priority. You can also build your own charcoal and sand filter to run the water through. This will just basically get most of the particulates out of the water. But with what we're dealing with today, you think of it. Many of the fields that grow crops, what do they do with those fields to keep the weeds down? Pesticides, herbicides, fungicides. They're spraying all kinds of chemicals. My uncle was a farmer back in North Dakota. He just passed away a few months ago. Anyway, he told me that when he first began farming, he did conventional farming. He said he used to put on about 8 quarts of chemical per acre. That's a lot. I was shocked. He said that was 20 years ago. He says, I'm putting on about 32 quarts an acre because all of the pests, whether they be plant or insects, are building up a resistance and a tolerance to these things. So they're having to put more and more of these things onto the crops. And so you think about that. That stuff is going to be in our water. So we need to be thinking of that. We don't want to be putting that stuff into our bodies. So water is of utmost. We need to focus on water. But were there any questions or comments? Did you have anything else?
I just want to remind y'all before we take a break, we do have a few things up here for sale. Some of you may not have been here when we talked about them. I think we have 10 copies of this left. This is the book by Jim Buller on basic wilderness survival. There's some really good information here. A lot of what we're talking about today is in here. These are $12. And then particularly for tomorrow's class, we have some extra paracord if you want. These are $5. If you wear a size 7.5 and you don't have wide feet like me, I have a pair of boots up here. We have one knife left from the knives that we had for sale, and I have one aluminum padded splint. And we'll talk about this when we talk about first aid stuff. Yes, Brother Martin?
One of the big things that I know will be a real big concern.
It gets way. We need the microphone. Yeah.
One of the big things that will be a real big concern when you won't have the modern convenience is understanding how to get rid of your waste. Now, I grew up, and I think you mentioned it, with an outhouse. And that maybe need to be understood or mentioned to help people to understand just how that works.
In our next section with health and hygiene, we're going to cover that because it is important. We have biblical instruction given in regards to that. But make sure and have containers for water, and we're going to get more detail of that. Let's take a 10-minute break, and we'll come back, and then we'll get into the health and hygiene.
Do I have any nurses assistants? Yeah, but you know how to do bed baths. Who's given bed baths before? Okay, lots of you. Good. Okay, so you understand the concept of bathing with just a little bit of water. Okay? Now, when I give a bed bath, just saying that I have soap, am I going to put my soap and lather up in my water there? Why? What's that? I won't have any rinse water, okay? So if you think about the concept of giving bed baths, when I first moved to Kentucky, we didn't have running water, we didn't have indoor plumbing, we had nothing. The way that we got our water was if it rained, we had purchased several 55-gallon barrels, plastic barrels that had the lids that clamped on. And we had built a barn, and it was myself and two friends of mine that had purchased this property together. And if we were running low on water and it rained at 2 a.m., we got up at 2 a.m. and set up our collection, our water catchment system. We had it set up so that we collected off of the front of the barn roof, which it was quite a large barn that we built. We collected off of the front of the roof that was out from the edge of the woods. We would let it rain for a little bit, and then we would plug in our system for the water to run into our barrels. In the wintertime, that was kind of tough because in Kentucky, it gets fairly cold in the winter. So we had several of these barrels in the middle of the barn, and we would carry the water by buckets into the barn to refill all of our barrels. That's where we got our water for bathing, for washing dishes, things like that. What we would do, we would try to filter it. Of course, we let the rain clean off the barn roof for a while before we started collecting the water. And then we would, as we poured it into the barrels in the inside of the barn, we had a huge t-shirt that we would tie around the top, and we would pour the water through that. That would catch leaves or bugs or anything like that. And then whenever we would get ready to use that and carry that into the house, we put it into big kettles and we would boil it before we used it. And whenever we put it, you'll see when we go out to the tent, there's this thing is really tough on the consonants. We had blue water container with a spigot on it, and we would put just a few drops of bleach in that just to make sure that, we weren't, going to wash our dishes with some bacteria or something. And that system actually worked quite well, but it was a lot of work. It was very labor intensive, but that's all we could do at the time because the county wouldn't run water down our little section of road. We couldn't afford a well, and so there was no year-round spring. We had a spring, but it was seasonal. And so that was the beginning of my real wake-up call to the importance of having water on a property. And so collecting rainwater does work, but just know it's going to be labor intensive, okay? It's going to cost effort. So what we would do, this is what we have now. At the time when I lived in Kentucky, before I married Kalon, does everybody know what a wash tub is? It's one of those big wash tubs. Yeah, for washing clothes. There you go. And we have that out there that we'll show you when we get outside. But I think mine was a number 2 wash tub, which means it was, about yay big and about this deep. And I could take a very good bath in a gallon of water. How many of you think you could take a good bath with a gallon of water? Several of you. Good. Okay, good. So I have some people with experience here. Now, washing my hair was a different story. When it was hair washing day, my hair was shorter then. It took another gallon to wash my hair because my hair is so thick. To rinse all the soap out took a little bit of effort. So what I would do, we'll just pretend this is my washcloth. I had my water in a gallon jug, and I had my basin, and I would wet my cloth, and I would put some soap on it. And don't put that soap in the rinse water, okay, or in your bucket of water. And of course, this is stainless steel, so I can actually heat this right on our little cook stove. We have a cook stove here that we're going to show you, and then we have another one out in the tent that we're going to show you. So I could just have this sitting on the stove while the stove's running, and I've always got warm water, okay. And when we lived in Kentucky, Kalon and I, we had a regular size wood cook stove, and you had to really watch it, keep it all the way away from the wood box because it would boil, and it would be boiling all my water out. So soap up my cloth. I always wash from clean to dirty, so I do my face first, and then I'm going to do my upper body and then my legs, and then my aunt, one time my uncle had been in a car wreck, and she was giving him bed baths in the hospital, and she said to my uncle, I'm going to wash as far up as possible and as far down as possible, but you're washing possible. So when you wash possible, that's the last thing, okay? That's the last thing you wash. And if you want to feel even more clean and you have a little bit of water left, you can actually kind of sit over that tub and pour the last of the water over possible if you would like to make sure because that kind of burns if you get soap in some places. So at any rate, that's the big thing there is just make sure that this basin, that's the way I did it. I would just use it as a catch basin. I poured my water. You could have a little, I don't know where, you could have a little pot, something like this, and I'm going to talk about all this stuff over here in a little bit. You could have a little dipper to rinse out your washcloth and then bathe the body part, and then you could rinse it a little bit, or even better yet, have a separate cloth for rinsing. So you have one cloth with soap and one cloth for rinsing, okay? Now these are paper towels, so we're just pretending, but you can see that having things that are durable is going to be very important because you're not going to be able to replace it. So whenever you're thinking about this time frame and you're going to go stock up on washcloths or whatever, don't do what I've done in the past. I'll just go to the dollar store and buy a $1 pack of washcloths. You know, if you're going to buy several, yeah, but those things you're going to be able to read the newspaper through those things in a couple of months. So buy quality, okay? So that's on bathing, basically all I wanted to cover. But one of the big things is these supplies. You know, this is kind of a luxury item in my mind. A stainless steel bucket like this. These are not cheap. I think we paid like $30 for that. What does that say?
$29.95.
$29.95. And this one, what is that?
$40.75.
$40.75. Now you can get cheaper. There are cheaper options. You can find 5-gallon metal buckets. Metal buckets are very handy to have because you can use it to put your wood ashes in, and wood ashes are valuable anyway. You can make soap and use them in the garden and many other things. So these are just some options. When we lived in Kentucky, we lived in an Amish and Mennonite community. And if you can ever visit an Amish and Mennonite community, not a store that's stuck off by itself in a big city, but an actual Amish Mennonite community, you'll be able to find a lot of really durable goods like this for a lot better price. If you bought this online, you'd probably pay a good bit more for it. And this is a nice heavy one. If you've not looked at it, you can pass it around. It's not one of those really thin ones that you push the bottom and it's going to ping and turn inside out or whatever. So these are very good quality buckets. And you can use a pot, you know, like a canning kettle or something like that. But those porcelain on steel canning kettles, if you bump it and chip, it's going to rust, okay? So I try to keep that for its intended purpose as much as possible and use other stuff like this for heating. Now, if we are... My husband mentioned that even during No Buy, No Sell, we're going to be doing some evangelism. We're going to be probably hoofing it on foot to go to the cities and warn and teach. And so this is a collapsible bucket that goes in my husband's backpack because you still need water even if you're camping. But you're not going to take this with you while you're backpacking or camping, but you can still have a water container. You can also just use your stainless steel water bottle, but that's not a lot of water. If you want to, if there's a creek close by and you can go get some water and bring it back to your camp, that's going to be a lot easier. Okay.
I just wanted to say, if you do get an opportunity, as my wife mentioned, we did live in the Amish and Mennonite community. Go visit there, spend some time there, because those people live the no buy, no sell lifestyle. You can find a lot of supplies that would be of good quality for you because they don't buy cheap stuff. Because they're used to working with their hands. That's how they do most of their work. So you can find a lot of good tools there, a lot of good, like my wife mentioned, these are heavy-duty stainless steel. This is quality. It's not a cheap one that's going to bend very easily. It's going to last some time, but consider that if you have opportunity and know of an Amish and Mennonite community, go there.
I think next is dental. I'm just going to go ahead and talk about the dental. Okay, next on the list here of things that we wanted to talk about and at least touch on is dental issues, oral care. Everybody's had a toothache, right? At some point. No matter what kind of pain you're having, whenever you're having that kind of pain is always the worst kind of pain possible. If you've got a headache, that's the worst pain. If you've got a backache, that's the worst pain. If you've got a toothache, that really is bad pain because you can't eat, you can't chew properly. And think about what it's going to be like during no buy, no sell if you get a bad cavity. So I cannot stress enough, and we are literally putting our money where our mouth is on this one because we are currently visiting a biological dentist in Dothan. And I can tell you, he found things with my teeth I had no idea were going on. They did, what's he call it? A cone beam x-ray where the thing goes around your head. And he found, I had a tooth on this side that every once in a while just was a little twingy. Well, here, the whole inside of the tooth had gone soft. If you've not heard a little bit of my health journey, I got Rocky Mountain spotted fever. I got tetanus before that. Then I got Rocky Mountain spotted fever. That triggered autoimmunity. And so I've got all these crazy health issues. The autoimmunity triggered hand problems, and so I had 5 hand surgeries. So it's kind of been a journey for me. And so the biggest thing I'm dealing with right now still is the Rocky Mountain spotted fever and the autoimmune disease. That has affected my teeth. The dentist, when we went down there, he looked at the microbiome of my mouth and told me, you have autoimmune disease. I said, yes, I do. He could tell based on the microbiome in my mouth. So if you've never considered going to a biological dentist, not just a run-of-the-mill dentist, and having things checked, you really might want to consider that, because what he found in my mouth, if we hadn't caught it early, would have hit me during this time that we're talking about. And my teeth would have been a major issue. I may not have been able to eat. So we're putting a considerable sum in my mouth, but I'm telling you something, our priorities, financially even, need to shift. Because if you can't eat, if you don't have adequate shelter, whether it's clothing or whatever, you're going to be in trouble. Okay, so I just want to encourage you, if you can, go to one of these biological dentists and see what's really going on in your mouth. Okay.
Why don't we just continue with hygiene?
Okay. First aid. We have a video on our YouTube channel about this first aid kit, and then my husband, this is the one he keeps in his truck. This one has some things in it that, you can only fit so much in a first aid kit. But I'm not going to break this down entirely, but I am going to show you a couple of features on this kit and why we like this. This is the military MOLLE, M-O-L-L-E, and somebody else is going to have to tell you what that means. It's multiple load bearing something, I don't know what it stands for. But anyway, you can actually strap this like on my husband's military backpack here. This is designed to strap on the outside. So this is for things that you're going to need immediate or urgent access to. This pack, we used to make these, but the overhead was quite high, so we stopped doing it, and it took a lot of time. And so, but these packs you can get off of eBay. And the way it works is it's got this strap that comes around it to secure it, and then it has a strap over the top to secure it to the back. This part right here is kind of a base, and that is going to stay. Let's say somebody is injured and I need my kit, but I don't have time to unstrap it from my backpack. I can just rip it off my backpack and go. I've got my kit, okay? And so I'll just open it up and show you a few things that are in it. I have some bandage materials. I have one of those SAM splints. Again, we have a video specifically on this kit on our YouTube channel. I got these bags off of eBay. Make sure that it has that feature where it has the Velcro that you can just rip free. I really like that feature. Another thing that you could use for a first aid kit is one of those trifold or roll up, what do you call it? A bathroom kit, like a shower kit that unrolls and has all your little toiletries and all that. Those make pretty good little first aid kits too. So you need to have some type of first aid stuff and know that it's going to perish with the using. So you need to have stuff to refill this. You need to know that, I've got cloths that I can use. Sanitary pads make great pressure bandages. So if you have somebody that has a bad cut or wound and it's bleeding profusely, you have your wife, your daughter, whatever, yourself, if you have sanitary napkins, that's what they're designed to do, is absorb blood, right? You can use that as a pressure bandage. Okay, so those are cheap and they're easy to get right now. So even if you're a man, I actually taught this to my first aid. I've certified all my students in first aid when I taught here. And Brother Don Miller calls me on the phone one day. He was standing in that section in Walmart, and he said, I'm kind of lost. I feel like an idiot standing here. I don't know what to get. So I had to give him some ideas of what to get. But that is a good thing to do for pressure bandages. Now, my husband's vehicle first aid kit, the biggest difference here is that we have chest seals. If you don't know what a chest seal is, you need to take a first aid class. I recommend a wilderness first aid class. The one that I took where I got my WFA certification from it's an online class at Herbal Medics Academy. Herbal Medics Academy. Sam Kaufman is the instructor. He used to be a Green Beret medic, and the guy knows his stuff. So, Wilderness First Aid, Herbal Medics Academy, and Sam Kaufman is his name. Chest seals, if you don't know, if you have a gunshot wound, you're going to need 2 because you're going to have an entry wound and an exit wound. So 2 chest seals for that. You can have a sucking chest wound with that. Anyway, I'm not going into first aid stuff. I'm just encouraging you to have some first aid supplies on hand and have them put together. I have one of these in my van. My husband has one in his truck, and these ones are for backpacking and camping. Okay, what's next? Medical missionary supplies and knowledge. We have at home, and Sister Marilyn, I don't see her. She must not be here anymore. But anyway, she makes fomentation pads and kits and stuff. I have a tote, a medical missionary tote that has fomentation pads. The pot has everything. I can grab that literally and go to somebody's house, and I have everything that I need to give treatments. You're going to have to talk for a little bit. Bug bites, snake bites. I can chime in on that a little bit.
Okay. Medical missionary supplies. My wife covered it. Just make sure, because I don't know if we need to explain to many of you, because that's why you're here, but have the have the necessary supplies that would allow you to do, excuse me, it must be the stand, that would allow you to do even the simple treatments as hot foot baths or fomentations. Water is a very powerful thing, and I know that I don't know who put it on, but how many were part of the class that they did here when they made their own charcoal? Was there anybody here that... Anyway, okay, there's some folks there. Wonderful. And so even learning that skill, so you don't have to have charcoal with you, you can learn how to make it. And even with knowing, I don't know if we're going to get to that, I think that's part of this, but knowing medicinal wild plants can be very valuable, because we're not going to have medicines with us. And many of the medications that you see today were derived from the things of nature, but they're only synthetically made. Of course, they have all the side effects, which the plants don't. So start learning now what plants could serve certain purposes. For example, something as simple as a bug bite. Does anybody know what you would do for a bug bite? A bee sting. You could put charcoal on it. I'm talking about a plant now. Aloe vera would soothe it. But plantain, does anybody know what plantain is? Yes, plantain. You mush that plantain up and rub it on there, take the sting right away. Yes, please, give Brother Marvin a microphone. You want to wait? The microphone's not turned on yet.
Before we came here, we was at Heartland, and I was a ground supervisor there. So anyway, we was back there. I was taking the students, and we would gather wood, because that's what they use for the heating. I had a gasoline container, and I was pouring gasoline on the wood to, and then stand back and then take it and light it. Well, they was burning some.
You want to hold the microphone closer?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. They was burning some wood, and I saw a streak of fire running, and it was running towards me. And I had a gasoline container in my hand, and I'm thinking, man, this thing coming for this gasoline tank. Before I just about got it out of my hand, it exploded. Blew me out the fire, but it messed up my hand. So I went, my face and everything. So my wife was really into the health, and we had a nurse there. And so what we decided to do, they put plantain poultices.
White potato.
Yeah, white potato. And then,
White potato.
yep. Then they put the plantain. You can still see some of the scar. It burnt that whole top of my hand off till you can see the wriggling of the bone. The wriggle of the bone. It hit the side of my face and everything. I was a mess. But I didn't take no Tylenol and nothing like that. They kept working on it. And finally, they peeled that thing off. And that skin starting to grow back. It was something because this was the first time we ever done this nature stuff. And it was amazing to see how that plant, and we used to go out and pick it up out the ground. So that is definitely a miracle working plant.
Amen. And His whole nature is full of these things. Now that's a whole nother class. But as my wife mentioned earlier, knowledge weighs how much?
Nothing.
Nothing. You can take it with you wherever you go. And understanding the principles and the healing power of the things in nature can serve us quite well. Because in this time period, we're not going to be able to buy or sell medications. Not going to happen. And so we need to have knowledge of what we can use in nature to provide for the things that we need. And so take the time to learn and study the things of nature. Did you want to continue?
Yeah.
I was also going to mention, not only won't we be able to buy those things, we won't be able to have insurance. A lot of people rely on their medical insurance. You know,
That's
when
right.
something happens, they go right to the emergency room or the hospital, and that we're not going to be able to do that. 'Cause we won't be able to buy insurance. So
During
even
that
more reason
time-
to have that knowledge.
Absolutely.
During that time, let's say for instance, one of your children was bitten by a brown recluse or a copperhead. Do you know what happens, or a rattlesnake? Do you know what happens to the tissues in the body when you get bitten by these venomous insects and reptiles? There's an enzyme that is in their venom that actually it kind of dissolves the glue that holds our cells together. If you've never seen pictures, and I have some that I could show you, but I'm not going to look it up. Go home and Google photograph of brown recluse spider bite or rattlesnake bite. You lose a lot of tissue. Most of the time, you end up with a big, huge crater of tissue that dies. There is an enzyme in snake venom and in these spider venoms called hyaluronidase. That is what it's hyaluronic acid that's kind of like the glue that holds our cells together. And hyaluronidase is in these venoms, and it dissolves that glue so that your cells just basically disintegrate. And you have all this tissue injury. There are herbs, such as echinacea, such as turmeric, that are hyaluronidase inhibitors. If you use plantain, echinacea, turmeric, use these on the wound and internally, you will not have the tissue damage that you will have if these are untreated. I guarantee you, most medical doctors do not know that. And so even if you have insurance now, I would still rather trust these herbs that God has given us than the medical doctors. Because between charcoal and these herbs, I believe that God has given us what we need to handle some very serious things. Now, don't get me wrong, allopathic medicine chokes me up just to say allopathic. But it has its place. I worked many years as an RN, and I worked in everything from critical care to home health to babies, and I did a lot of stuff when I was in nursing. And the door did not hit me in the backside when I left. And I don't need to go back. We have what we need, okay, for the most part. Now, if I'm in a car wreck and my bone is sticking out, I don't really need a charcoal poultice, okay? I might need some pins or something. It has its place. But it's way farther out there than what most of us give. I want to talk about bug bites just a minute because I have Rocky Mountain spotted fever. Now, if you ever have watched any of these survival shows or YouTube videos on survival, 9 times out of 10, the first thing these guys talk about when they come out of an experience like that is bugs. Bugs were the hardest thing they had to deal with. Now, we have all kinds of natural insect repellents. We have some pretty hefty ones. This is one by Sawyer that we do use. This is not to be used on your skin. You spray this on your outer clothing and leave it. You don't wash it out. In other words, you're going to wear that stuff for a while. So I would put it on like an outer shirt. You spray it on, out, just soak it down good, and then you wear that as your outer garment. That will work, but that's going to perish with the using. So what are some things that we could do, for instance, to keep ticks off? Okay? Can you think of anything? Citronella. Are you going to be able to grow a citronella plant? I can't hear you. I'm hard of hearing.
It's very much like the lemongrass, but it has a very stronger taste, and it's also like the lemongrass that can grow even all throughout the year. Like it dies off during the winter, but it comes back up.
Okay. Now, if I'm on my homestead and I know that I've planted that, which we should be planting our own herbs and stuff, that's good. If I'm in the wilderness, let's hope I can find it. Okay? My point with this is, yes, we need to be able to learn to identify these things. We need to have these things growing. But there are some very simple, practical things that we can do to help prevent tick bites. First thing is tuck everything in. That's one of the reasons why I wear knee socks. Because I can tuck my leggings in. Even in the summertime, you'll see me a lot of times I've got something on my legs. Whether it's just a light pair of scrub pants. They're cotton usually. You can get them in all kind of different colors. And if your skirt's long enough, you can hide the things. Nobody knows you got them on. Tuck them in your socks. Because what do ticks do when they get on? They climb up. They're going up. And so they're trying to find an opening. So if you tuck your pant legs in, you tuck your shirt in, you keep your, some sleeves closed tight. These are things that you can do that will help. Light colored clothing, something like this color, a khaki type color. It's very much easier to see ticks on lighter colored clothing than it is darker colored clothing. And I think it's sinister, but ticks are attracted to darker colors, okay? So lighter colors, you can see them better, and they don't seem to be as attracted to these lighter colored things. So, and that's something that is kind of important to me, having had Rocky Mountain spotted fever. That is not something you want to go through, okay? I wouldn't wish that on anybody. Okay, wound care, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. We have a video about it on our YouTube channel, but one of the big things to make sure that you can do with a wound is clean it. So irrigation, one of the things that you can do if you're out and you happen to have a plastic water bottle is to just take your knife that you're always going to start carrying now, right? Everybody's going to start carrying a knife. We haven't talked about knives yet. But I always have one with me, okay? Mine is actually a clip knife. It's an automatic. I'm not supposed to have this, but anyway. My husband bought this for me because at the time I was having a lot of problems with my hands. But you can take this and poke a hole in the lid, and you can use this to irrigate a wound, okay? So that's a really simple way. In the first aid kits, we have a syringe in there. And so you're going to need a way maybe to get some clean water, but usually most people have one of these fairly handy. That's really all I'm going to talk about with wound care, because the next session is on medicinal wild plants. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. That is a whole separate class. Maybe sometime we can do a weed walk or whatever here. When I lived here before, I was not really into wild plants and finding stuff. I spent a lot of time in the woods, but I was just stepping on everything. You know, I wasn't looking for plants. I know more what's in North Dakota, Kentucky, and those regions, so I'm still learning what's available to us around here, and I have found some pretty cool stuff here, but I'm still learning. Okay, here's the part that I'm going to have my husband share this passage. Brother Marvin mentioned it earlier, and it's about waste, human waste. I'm going to let my husband share a little bit, and then I'm going to share some things on this point as well. The microphone's back there.
I just wanted to say something on the bug bites too. Now, I did pest control for 8 years, and you don't want to use that stuff. But there are plants that contain some of the things, again, just like in the chemical world, they all were derived from something. But this permethrin, what's in here, was derived from marigolds. And what I found, because I've always wanted to, because I did the pest control in the wrong direction using chemicals. When my wife first met me, she said, I want to take your liver out and put it on a washboard and wash you, because I was surrounded in chemicals. I didn't understand that. But I've always wanted to endeavor to find the things in nature that would help repel the pests that we have to deal with, because as my wife mentioned, I used to watch these survival shows, and it was one thing that they all had in common after they spent out a number of days out in the wilderness with just a knife and water or whatever they chose to do. When they'd come back and they would interview them, what was the hardest thing? Almost 9 times out of 10, every one of them said that the insects. They were miserable. And I can testify to that, but I use one of these too. It probably would be nice. You could put one of these over your head for those flying gnats. But there are many other options. But anyway, what I just wanted to share with you, to make it simple, what they're finding is to find a plant that is very fragrant, because it will mask your scent. That's just boiling it down as simple as I can. I don't know of every plant, but there's peppermint, lavender, just trying to think of the different plants, but you can find them. Anyone that contains a fragrance, you can use that to rub on you. It will mask your scent. That's as far as I've gotten with that. But anyway, I wanted to share a scripture verse with you, and because really there's much we can learn from the experience of the children of Israel in the wilderness. There were many things that they had to learn, because there was approximately 2 million people living in tents. There had to be some structure, some guideline for them, especially when you think about it, about 2 million people when you're dealing with waste. There had to be some counsel on that. But in Deuteronomy, chapter 23, there was counsel given in that area. In verses 12 and 13, it says, Thou shalt have a place also without the camp whither thou shalt go forth abroad. So there is a designated area that you should go to do this. Verse 13 says, And thou shalt have a paddle upon thy weapon, and it shall be, when thou wilt ease thyself abroad, thou shalt dig therewith, and shalt turn back and cover that which cometh from thee. So there's our instruction. It says, have a paddle. And part of our hands-on work we're going to let you do when we get outside is to make one of these paddles. This is a digging stick, and we'll explain more to you that how to make this and what the uses are for. But this is something similar that they use. They would dig a hole with this and then bury it, but don't bury it with this, because you're going to use this for other things. Yeah, this will be your dirty end, this will be your clean end. And you see a notch on the end of this because you can notch a pot on this. You can hold it over the fire. Serves different purposes. So you want to be careful how you use this. But we're going to go outside. We're going to let you make one of these if you want. It's called a digging stick. So that's the counsel we're given on what to do with our waste. I think that's everything for health and hygiene. We want to address...
I want to cover a couple more things that I thought of. On the health, we like to walk in the woods, and my husband has this stick, and this stick has actually killed 2 copperheads at least.
Yeah, so when you go to the woods, it's always good to have tools. And I found this stick because when I come from North Dakota, we don't have much for snakes. So when I came to Kentucky, I was seeing a snake every corner, so I'm going to have something with me to protect me from snakes. Now, the reality of it is I never saw that many snakes. But I have killed a couple of copperheads with this. I was glad to have it with me.
Yeah, he actually pinned it with that, and we used my stick to smash his head. So they're very handy. Walking sticks are very handy. You can reach over a log, make sure there's no snake. You can move some brush around, make sure there's no snakes or whatever. If you're harvesting wild edibles, you can make sure the coast is clear. They're very handy, so consider that.
We're not cruel people. I just want to mention this. We're not cruel people. We love snakes, but the poisonous ones, I don't know that God ordained those.
Right, yeah. If he's in my territory and he's poisonous, he'll be dispatched. Okay, now one thing I want to mention on these digging sticks, so that everybody can hear before we get outside, because we're going to be using sharp instruments, and if you choose to do this activity, you might get cut. Don't hold me responsible, okay? We're going to give you some safety things, all right? Whenever you make your digging stick, you're going to do what's called chamfer the edges. If you just cut it off and you start pounding on the end of that stick, what's going to happen? It's going to splinter out. If you chamfer it, in other words, we'll show you what we mean by that. In other words, just sort of round it off, it will not split like that, okay? So we'll show you actually how to do this when we get outside, and we'll let you borrow some of our tools to do so. Now, one other thing that I wanted to mention on the hygiene, when I first moved to Kentucky, and I mentioned we had no indoor plumbing and all, we tried several different ways to deal with our waste. It got old having to go outside at night, so we each had a bucket with a lid, and we would use that, and that's what people used to use. They call them a chamber pot, okay? That's what we used at night. And then we tried to build an outhouse. Well, it didn't smell good. We tried the lime in it, still didn't smell good. The thing that we found that was most useful was digging deep trenches. And that was my job because I was the youngest of the bunch at the time. And we would just dig these deep trenches. We had a tarp set up around it, and the trenches were just wide enough that you could put a foot on either side, and you could squat over that trench and then just put dirt over it. That worked better than just about anything, okay? Because you're burying it right away, but you don't want to have to dig a hole when you got to go, so we dug the trenches ahead of time. So we're being practical here. Jim Buller mentions that when he took a group of people out one time for a week, some of the people were so inhibited to do their business in the woods that they held it until they got back. And then you're reabsorbing all that waste. It's designed that we get rid of that stuff. So we need to deal with these very touchy but practical issues. Okay, what's next?
We'll try to get one more subject in of these priorities, and we want to take a look at fire. Now, what are some things we could use fire for? Pardon? Heat, to keep warm. Very good. What else? Cooking. What else? Pardon? Medicine. Why would that be medicine? Hot and cold, very good. But also, too, they say if you stare at a fire, the flame increases the melatonin in your body as well. So it can be therapeutic, the fire. What else is fire good for? Protection, that's right. What else? To cook, I think somebody might have mentioned that. Cook, security, drying clothes. You're going to wash clothes, you need to dry them. So you can see that there is a great need for fire. And so learning the skill of starting a fire, I don't know how many people have done that. Okay. What method did you use? Gasoline.
Well, one of the methods we used was solar, just from the sun.
Okay, sun, let's take a look at that. Magnifying glass. When I was a young boy, I liked sports. And I had a ball glove, and when we bought ball gloves, we didn't have a bunch of selections to choose then. All of us boys, there were 3 in my family, we all got the same glove. So we needed to determine whose glove was which. And so our neighbor showed us how you could take the sun, and you get the beam focused right, and you can burn your name into your glove in the leather. And so I thought, well, can you start a fire with that? Of course you can. Yeah. So you can.
Burn
You just.
somebody with it.
But this is limited. It has its limits because you have to have the sun to do so. Okay. Now, it's much easier to start a fire with this if you have charred cloth. Because once you get the charred cloth lit up, which, let me grab some of the supplies here. Oh, you've got them all here. Oh, okay. Very good.
I think the punk wood is over here.
Does anybody know what charred cloth is? Yes. Okay, so those of you who have tried starting fires are familiar with what charred cloth is. Well, what we use is the old denim jeans. When they get to where you can't wear them anymore, save them. And you cut them up into little sections. And you'll get a tin. I think this is an Altoid tin, but you can use any sort of tin. And how to make it is you fill the denim cloth in here that you've cut into sections, and you will close this. And these tins are not sealed well enough, but if you get one that seals real well, you'll have to put a hole in the top of it. And you set this in the fire, and you let it burn. And when you see it smoking, you know it's doing its work. Once it's done smoking, leave it in there for a few more, well, maybe another minute would be sufficient, but take it out. Don't open this, because if you open it, it's going to flame up and you're going to lose your charred cloth. Keep it closed. Let it cool off. Once it's cooled off, you have charred cloth. Now, you can do that too with this. You probably can't tell what this is, but this is what we call punk wood. This is rotten wood, but it's very soft. You can do the same thing with this.
You have to make sure that you can just put your thumbnail right into it. Okay, we'll pass it around so you can see just at what stage it needs to be.
And you make that the same way. Put it in a tin, of course, you use a bigger one, and this one might be sealed better. I don't remember if we put a hole in the top of it or not. But again, when it's done smoking, take it off, let it cool. But the purpose of this is this will take a spark very easily. Okay?
And it gives you a larger mass of spark, because you're going to have not just one little piece of char cloth, you're going to have this whole thing, just embers everywhere. And it's a lot easier to start a fire with good embers.
So we're just going to cover the basics here, probably not too much in depth, because this is one we're going to do tomorrow. All of you are going to get to be able to start a fire. And so we'll go into more detail. We're going to have hands-on with this. And this, people think you have to be clever to be outdoor survival, but if you got lighters, use them.
Do you know how that works? Yeah. It's got a little flint and steel in it. But the fuel is gas, But don't throw it away when you're out of fuel, because it's still got the flint and steel in it.
And so the charred cloth and the charred punk wood will take a spark. You build a bird's nest. Now, we're going to show you what you can make a bird's nest out of. You can go and tear the bark off of a cedar tree, and they've got that fibrous material that's behind it. You build a bird's nest out of that, or you can use what we did. We collected some lighter knot. Does anybody know what lighter knot is? Or knotwood? Yeah.
Alabama fatwood. Y'all don't know what this is? Canlin. Yeah.
But
okay, good. Yeah, this stuff is gold.
what this stuff is what we've done. We've scraped shavings of it because this is from a dead pine tree. And when the pine tree dies, all of the sap or the resin settles down into the trunk. So look for a pine tree that has died and has fallen over and start digging into the trunk. And you'll know when you find it because it's going to smell like pine, very strong of that resin. So once you put a spark to this will hold a flame for a while. It will be quite easy once you master this to start a fire with this. But we're going to show you how to build bird's nests. I brought some hay from the horses because it was dry. This time of year, there's just not a lot of material to make bird's nests with. But again, tomorrow, we're going to go through all of this hands-on. But does anybody know what this is? You probably can't see that. This is a piece of steel, and this is a piece of flint. Now, when you go to Kentucky, you find flint everywhere. It's very hard to find here, but you don't have to use flint. There are other stones that you can use. And I've got to hold this microphone, but Danna, if you want to demonstrate.
Mostly what you're going to find around here is chert. The object is you want to, and I know it's hard to see from here, but you want to hit the stone with as much force but as little contact as possible. So you want a glancing blow, and that will give you some sparks. And what you do is you take a piece of the char cloth. We have a whole class section on this tomorrow, but we're just kind of giving you an idea. You just take a little piece of the char cloth, place it on the stone, and then you're going to strike it. It's a good idea to wear gloves when you do this because I have bloodied my knuckles many times starting fire this way. But this is a very reliable way, but it's not my absolute favorite way to start fire.
And we're going to show you how to start a fire from the ground up, starting with these simple things to the smaller twigs, the bigger branches, how to set your fire that you can take advantage of the draft if there's a breeze outside. We'll go through all of those things. I would like my wife to show you this. She may have one there.
My striker's not in here. This is what's called a ferro rod. Does anybody know what a ferro rod is? It's fire steel. Some people call it a fire steel. And we didn't actually talk about knives and stuff yet.
Well, tomorrow, again, we're going to have a separate class on the knives. We're going to go through the maintenance of a knife, the safety aspects of knives and axes, and how to keep them sharp and operable, and how to treat them. So we'll have more information dealing with the knives tomorrow.
This particular knife comes with a ferro rod that has a very unique feature. This gray part here is magnesium. And if you don't know, I think magnesium burns at like 3,000 degrees. So you can take your knife, shave off a few of these magnesium pieces, and then throw a spark on it with the ferro rod, and it will burn. But I just wanted to mention that there is a difference between a magnesium rod and a ferro rod. The magnesium is just a fuel source, but the ferro rod is actually where you're going to get your sparks from. You can use the back of a knife. This one's new, so it doesn't have, let me see yours. Okay. You can actually really get some sparks off of the thing. Now, when I had just had my hand surgery, this was very hard for me. But it's a lot easier now that I'm healed. But you can see You really get some sparks with that. And I won't get carried away. This is my favorite part of the class.
Playing with fire.
Yes, I like to play with fire.
But we're all going to get an opportunity to play with fire tomorrow. So we just want to introduce it to you, the different ways that you can start a fire. And it takes a skill. You think, well, that's pretty easy to get a spark in the charred cloth.
Wait
It's
till you
not
try
difficult, but it does take practice. These are things that you need to practice to build a proper bird's nest, to build a proper fire. There are different ways and different fires. You can even have a fire that's smokeless, and there may be times where you want it to be smokeless. So tomorrow, if you come tomorrow morning, we're going to go through more detail, and you'll get to do hands-on yourself. As far as the fire, I think that's all we'll cover now. But we've got different methods we're going to show you too. I was told that you can soak cotton balls in petroleum jelly, so I tried that. And it does work, but I just want to share you a mistake I made. I love my grandparents, the most favorite people in the world to me. They're all gone now, but I wanted a keepsake of my grandmother, and she gave me this coin purse. It's a leather coin purse. And so I just want to tell you, when you make cotton balls out of petroleum jelly, don't store them in the leather purse. What's going to happen? That's right. The leather's going to absorb the petroleum out of the cotton balls. Now, I still tried the cotton balls. They still work, but they don't burn quite as long. But anyway, many different ways we can start a fire. It just takes knowledge and practice.
What's next on the list?
Next is food. Do we want to cover
Okay,
that?
the only thing I would like to, because we're in here, I would like to talk about these different little stoves that we have up here. I know you may not be able to see from in the back the different little stoves, but I'm just going to take a minute and cover them. I think they can see them on the camera, and you're welcome to come up afterward. I kind of have these set up in an order of favorite and what I believe is practical, useful, effective, and all these things. So these are just some examples of cook pots that you might use on an actual campfire. I like this particular one because it comes with a little case, and if you've never put a pot on an open fire, it gets smut and soot all over your stuff. So it's good to have some type of container to put your pot in before you put it back in your backpack. Otherwise, everything's going to be covered. I like this because it has a bail, and it has a handle, and it has a little lid that you can lift. Now, this is the basics right here, okay? So this is my husband's. It goes in his backpack for cooking. When we can't buy or sell, one of the things that's going to really, of necessity, change is the way we cook, because we're not going to have refrigeration. So are we going to be cooking a huge pot of spaghetti or a huge pot of soup that's going to last me for a few days? No. We're going to be cooking one meal at a time because we have no way to preserve it. Now, for me, sorry y'all, but I really don't care for being in the kitchen. I'd rather be outside. That's a little bit of a challenge, but at least I get to cook out of doors sometimes. So that's a very positive thing for me. Now, have you ever used a little can of Sterno? That's where you just take the lid off and you light a match and it burns. I think this is alcohol based. These are designed to be used with the little collapsible stoves like this. And it's fairly effective. You could put a fire under here and burn, this little stove with this. Now, obviously, we've never used this one. We just found this one at an Amazon return store, and it was not damaged, so we bought it just to kind of help show people this option. Now, this little cookware kit here, I first saw this at a Walmart a couple years ago. I think the name brand is Melissa and Doug's, if I'm not mistaken. It says on the bottom of these pots, not intended for cooking. It's stainless steel, and it's a fairly heavyweight stainless steel. So if you keep an eye on this. $25 for this little kit, okay, that has this little pot, which is fairly similar to my husband's cook pot, for which I paid $35. Okay, so you do the math. $25 for this whole set. It even comes with some little wooden utensils. And for our tent situation, it's a nice little kit that can just sit either on the stove shelf or on a table or even hang on the wall of the tent. And so it's very organized. You're going to be cooking in small amounts, so this is a very good option. The other option, I want to show you this rocket stove when you come back from lunch. So when you come back, you have an assignment. I want you to bring some twigs. Pencil-sized twigs. They can be anywhere from a foot long, 8 inches, somewhere in there. Bring us some twigs, because I want to demonstrate this stove, okay? You can just, twigs you can just break, okay? The first time we got this rocket stove, I think that was the first time we used it, was when we made that video. So we do have videos on this on our YouTube channel. The YouTube channel is under my name, Danna Gesellchen, if you've not seen our videos. This thing really works. It really puts out the heat. It'll cook up your food right now, but you've got to sit there and feed the little sticks into it. Okay? So it's not something that you walk away from and you come back and your food is cooked. That's not happening. You've got to feed it. And then we graduate up to what we call our little winter well cook stove. Okay? The winter well we do have a video of on our YouTube channel. This is a very nice little cook stove. The only thing that I don't like about it is that on the door, there's no gasket. So you don't have as good a control here over the fire. Other than that, this is a fabulous little stove. We haven't had a chance to use it in the tent yet. We were going to, and we both ended up with the flu a couple weeks ago. So at any rate, this comes with a water tank, and you cannot put it on the stove without the water tank. You'll burn up the little gaskets in the spigot. And the spigot works very nicely. I think this is a 2 liter. Is this 2 liter or 1 liter? It's not very large, but it's enough to just have a little bit of hot water on hand. You can also hang this on the side of the stove. Okay? If you're wanting to use the top for something else, and I'll just show you how it just has 2 little tabs here that just hang right on the side of the stove. Okay? It also comes with an oven that you can bake in, and it looks like a little Easy Bake Kids oven that's a toy. But I'm going to tell you, we kind of were looking at it like that, and when we tested out this stove, my husband put a piece of toast here and a piece of toast here, and this one was a crispy critter in short order. So it really works well, okay? It's a very effective little cook stove. So you could actually bake bread or whatever in here, and it collapses down. This entire stove will fit in here. And it is a little bit heavy for me. My husband can move it with no problem. For me, I'm kind of like this, you know. But it's a cook stove. It's a heat stove. This right here could be a real game changer if you have to take a tent and go to somebody's property. This right here would be a very good consideration for you. I think that's pretty much it. Somebody gave me this cast iron pot here, and you actually could bake with this on the top of this little stove by using this lid. So you could actually bake some bread in that. What we found was that the front of the stove tends to be the hottest, and the middle would kind of be like medium, and then back towards the chimney pipe, it's not quite as hot. Okay.
This is a smaller stove than what we're going to show you, the one that we have in the tent, but this stove is a little more expensive. But I want to tell you, this is a quality stove. And when you understand what type of shelter you're going to be living in. That's what you want to ascertain first as to what size of stove that you're going to need and want. And do your research. This one, how much did this one run again? With all the accessories.
We got all the accessories. It was around 700.
Yeah, it was quite spendy, but I want to tell you, that is a quality stove. That's going to last you a long time.
Yeah. And does anybody know what this is? It's a little bitty fan, yes. It works on thermal electricity. There's a little, I don't know if you can see right here, these two spots, there's a little, I forget what they call it. It's a thermal pad of some sort, and it converts heat energy into kinetic energy. There's a little motor in here. When you set it on the top of your wood stove and it gets hot, this will begin to spin. And the hotter it is, the faster it spins. Now, when we lived on our farm in Kentucky, we had one of these to blow warm air back into our bedroom, and you could really tell a difference when it started working. It really moves the air. Very, very effective. Okay, I think that's it, and we can stop for lunch now and come back.
I just wanted to mention one thing with the stove, because we learned this too, that if you're going to build your own structure, because now if you have a structure already, this would probably limit it to that, but size your stove to the structure that you have, number one. Number two, don't make the mistake that almost everybody makes, and they put their stove in the corner of their house. You're putting all your heat in the corner, and then you got to get it out of there. Put your stove in the middle of the house, and when we built our house, we made sure that the kitchen was in the center of our home. And so that's where we put our stove. That way the heat was evenly distributed throughout the house, and we designed it in such a way that there wouldn't be a lot of curves and hallways, because you got to get that heat down there. And I cut vents above the doors and in different areas to the rooms that were next to it to allow the heat, because heat rises. It's a good way to transfer the heat to different rooms, because this is going to be your heat source, going to be your cook source. Your stove is going to be a very valuable tool, so do some research. Know what size of stove you want, do the customer reviews, and spend some time. And if it costs you a little more, like this one did, it was okay, because this stove is well worth it.
By the way, I didn't eat these. I just rescued the can at Christmas from my family. So this is pine shavings, the fatwood kindling. And we'll talk about this more tomorrow. So most of the time when we talk about this stuff, one of the first things that I say when we start talking about no buy, no sell is that I believe that time has already begun. I neglected to say that this morning. We were talking to Brother John, and he made that statement. He reminded us, and it is true. If you think about how easy is it to buy good food these days, it's not very easy. If it's not genetically engineered, it's loaded with pesticides, or it's not grown on soils that are full of nutrients. And so if the soil doesn't have the nutrients to give the plant, then the plant is not going to have the nutrients that our body needs. And that, I believe, is why we're seeing so many health issues today. It's because our bodies are completely depleted of minerals. That's why we like to promote the use of fulvic and humic minerals, but that's a discussion for a different time. So this problem with buying and selling has already begun, and now, since the war began between Russia and Ukraine, fuel prices are going up, food prices are starting to go up. And so we're just going to see this problem escalate. And if we're not in a position to grow our own food and supplement that with what we can harvest from nature, we're really going to be in a predicament. That's why I like to preach the foraging message, because foods that you pick out in nature are grown in native soil. It's where they want to be. So they're going to have a lot more nutrition in it than foods that we can grow on soils that have been used and used and used, and perhaps not properly amended. I'm sure that this soil is properly amended. Okay, how many of you have a supply of seeds? Very good, but I would like to see every hand go up. If you don't have good garden seeds, and what do I mean by good garden seeds? I don't just mean organic. I mean open pollinated heirloom seeds that will come back true to that seed stock. In other words, many of these seeds that have been hybridized, when you plant that seed, it's going to come true to whatever the box or bag says. But if you save the seeds from that produce and try to grow those seeds the next year, they're going to begin to revert back to what they were bred from. So they're not going to come true to the parent that it came from. If you save your seeds off of open pollinated heirloom plants, learn to save your own seeds. Then you know you always have good quality fresh seeds. So this is not something that's going to just happen overnight. That's why we really feel kind of urgent to share these things with people, because even though, as we mentioned this morning in the PowerPoint, the real focus of Closure for Jesus ministry is not survival or country living or even medical missionary work. The real focus is helping us to be prepared in heart and life to cooperate with Christ in His work right now to put an end to sin. And that's what we're waiting for. He wants to come back. Okay? A couple other things. We're just touching on some things that we forgot to mention this morning. Any of you in the wintertime, do your thumbs ever split? Right here at the corner of your nail. How does that feel? That can be very painful, can't it? Well, when we can't buy and sell and you can't get your regular whatever it is you put on that, how are you going to take care of that? What are you going to do if you get, I think it was last June, we flew out to Oregon and we did a seminar out there. And it's much drier there than where we at the time lived in Kentucky. And of course we were speaking all week, and I had more classes to do because people were very interested in herbs and stuff like that. So I was talking a lot, and I got dehydrated. And my lips got so chapped, they looked like a piece of raw beef. And they were so painful. Finally, I had time to run to a store and find some Burt's Bees or something. But what if I couldn't buy or sell? How would I deal with that? Two things that I can tell you right now off the bat are difficult to find in nature are oils and salt. There are salt stores, different places. Now we can get here in this area, I might go for finding a hickory tree. Has anybody ever eaten hickory nuts? Nobody's ever eaten a hickory nut? They're delicious. Y'all got to try that this fall. But bring your hammer because they're very hard to open. Yep, very hard. When I was a kid, we raised hogs, and we could throw those things in the hog pens, and they ate them like candy. Just crunch, crunch, like it was nothing to it. Yes. Yeah, I didn't want to get stuck in the hog pen. My sister took care of the hogs, and I did the horses and the cows. So anyway, just think about that kind of thing comfort-wise. If you can't buy chapstick, if you can't buy hand lotion or some kind of salve, if your thumb's split, you can't buy Band-Aids to put on. These are the kind of things that we really need to be brainstorming together about. It would be ideal to have groups of you get together and say, what about this? What about that? And what might you do? How could we solve this problem? You guys have a tremendous resource here. All these young people, man, you guys could solve some problems. Okay, one other thing that I wanted to mention. My husband was talking about this morning how during the no-buy, no-sell time frame, there's still people in the cities to warn, but we're not going to be buying fuel, so we won't be driving our vehicles. So how are we going to get to the city to warn the people who need to hear the truth? We're going to be walking, right? Well, I don't know about you, but I'm just not too sure I can walk all the way to Columbus in a day comfortably. Number one, I'm not in that kind of shape. you know, and so I need to be. But even during that time, we're going to need to have some wilderness survival type skills because we're probably going to be camping along the way. He mentioned navigating. You know, we may actually have to travel in the woods. Do we know how to navigate our way around? Do we have maps? I'm not the one to teach you how to navigate. I've not studied it enough. But if there's anybody here who's ex-military, you know how to do that, right? Okay, so you have resources here who can teach you. But what I wanted to mention is about the backpacks. I'm going to just step here just quick. This is my husband's military backpack. Now, I do have one of these in my van because if you think back when they had the big snowstorm up in Atlanta a couple of years ago, all of those interstates were parking lots. Nobody went anywhere. And if you didn't have some kind of supplies in your vehicle, you were in a world of hurt. So we keep a backpack in our vehicle at all times that has a little bit of food, fire starting, flashlight, maybe an extra pair of warm socks, a few things like that. This stays in my husband's truck, and I have one like it in my van, but it's smaller because these military backpacks, I cannot take the straps up enough to fit me, okay? I'm just a little bitty person. And so I'm not going to adjust his straps, but you can see that's not very comfortable for backpacking, okay? Now for him it fits much better. What I decided to go with instead was to be fitted, and this is not packed for backpacking. It's way too heavy right now. This probably weighs about, I'm guessing 25 or 30 pounds. Way too much weight, okay? But I'm right now just storing things in it. But if you'll notice, one thing that I'd like to point out about this pack is that the back is, what do they call it, ergonomics. So it's designed to fit my back. I was measured for this backpack. The waist, you can see how little that is. That's designed for my body. The shoulder straps are very small because my back is very small. And so you might want to consider, rather than a military backpack, which those are great, they've got all the straps and everything, this is much more comfortable for me, okay? I can put the strap around my waist, and that's where my load is on my hips here, okay? So this is much more comfortable to me, and I'm carrying the weight here on my hips. Sorry about that. At any rate, you might want to consider being measured for a backpack, particularly if you're a smaller person or if you have a very short waist or something like that, okay? So, some of you may not have this issue, but those of us who are half pints, it's an issue to be contended with. Nothing fits when you're petite, right? Okay, let's see what else I have forgotten. I think it's your turn.
Okay, as my wife said, what we want to do before we go outside, there were just a few items that we had overlooked that were on the table here. We want to mention them to you. And as all of you know, it seems like the whole world is into this prepping. You know, so it's not hard to find ideas to sustain yourself. And what do I mean? For example, lights. There's all kinds of lighting out there that you can find that's powered solar. Just set it in the sun. Even flashlights. I've even got a couple that they got little generators inside of them. It's got a handle on here. I don't like this. I can't demonstrate anything. But you take it out and you crank it. We've got others that fold out. Again, little solar panels. They're sustainable. You don't need batteries. But if you do have electricity or a solar system, I would highly recommend, I use nothing anymore but rechargeable batteries. I see the church does here too.
can wind this up enough that it'll burn for a while, but it hasn't been wound in a while.
Yeah, it's been setting for a while. But anyway, rechargeable batteries, a great idea. I think that was it. Oh, yeah. These are the lights that we used when we built our home before we had electricity. And these little lights, I tell you, are fabulous. Don't look like much, but you can hang them wherever you want them. And what I like about it is it's remote control as well. So you're not fiddling with switches, but just set these out by a window, run the cord in the house if you want, and you charge them. They'll hold a charge often as we use them. Those are probably the best lights that we have used. Lights, what else did we forget? Oh, compass, it was mentioned. Now, we're not going to deal with this, but it is a good idea, if you know you're going to be in a certain area, to get a map of that area. And then get yourself a compass and orientate yourself to the surroundings that you're living in. A compass can be a real lifesaver. If you're out in the woods, you get lost, know the area that you're at, identify it, and you can find yourself back home using the compass in your map. Also, let's see, what else did we forget here? Oh, something I highly recommend to all of you. A little miniature Bible. It's easy to overlook something so special, but you know the times that we're coming in, it's good to have this encouragement. It's even better if we can put it in our hearts. But I wanted to mention that we keep these, churches give them away. You can buy them as well. Another thing too, books. While you can still get books to learn how to identify wild edibles, medicinal plants, those kind of things, knots, we've got all kinds of books. Knots, you would think, well, what do I need to know about knot tying? But we'll get into knots tomorrow, but I'll give an example. Before I knew how to tie knots, there was a vehicle that went in the ditch, and so I just tied my double overhand knot that I usually tie, and I pulled him out. I got him out, the knot held, but I could not untie that rope. And we're going to learn knots that you can tie and pull vehicles out and still be able to untie them. But we're going to not spend much time on pulling vehicles out, but more practical things as far as setting up a tent. There's certain knots you want to use to be able to keep them tight. Taut lines, truckers' hitches, different things. Knots, until you have a purpose for them, you'll never understand the real value of them. But we're going to look at that tomorrow. So get books, gardening books. If you don't have gardening skills, get books on gardening. Just think of the things, the practical skills that you'll need to know. Get books for them, because the internet, we're going to lose the internet. So books are valuable. Hang on to your books.
If you don't mind. Some of you were not here this morning, and we mentioned this book on basic wilderness survival that we have. We have a few copies left. These are $12. And then we also have some paracord, if you want to be ready for the knot tying class tomorrow. The paracord is $5. The books are $12. So if you want one of these, the information is really good. You're welcome to come up and look it over if you'd like to.
Okay. How many people took notes this morning? Good. Turn your notes upside down. Don't look at them. We want to review because we have some new people here, I see. So let's do a little reviewing.
Okay. I have a mic, so I don't need two. You remember the survival priorities that we talked about this morning? Okay. What's number one? I want them in order. What's number one? Shelter. Okay. What's number two? Water. Okay, good. They were listening. What's number three? Okay. Who says health concerns? Now, what was the other thing that was mentioned? Fire. Who says fire? Okay. Health concerns. What's number 4? Fire. Good. Okay. And finally, what's number 5? Now, which one would most people put number 1? Exactly. But it's actually the last of our priorities. We can live for a couple weeks without food, really. We might not feel good. We might be kind of grumpy, but we could live, okay?
Another review, too, because we want to keep these things in mind and we need to start investing into them. What were the tools that we talked about this morning? Can you name some? Pardon? A sword?
A sword. The closest
He must
thing
have
we
been
have
sleepy
to a
while we
sword
were
is
talking
this.
about this. We have one close. He saw that earlier. That's where he got
That's the
that
closest we get to a sword.
from. Yeah. A digging stick. Very good. What's
Very good.
the use for a digging stick?
Digging sticks.
That's right. To dig a hole for your waste. That's right. It can be used for other things, foraging as well.
Yes.
Okay, other tools. Walking stick. What's the good use for a walking stick? Pardon? It worked for me. Yes. Walking sticks are so nice. You can take a load off of your feet when you're walking and when you're foraging. It's always nice to poke around first before you put your hand down.
I heard this.
Axe.
I heard somebody say axe. We're going to talk more about these cutting and chopping and digging tools and all this stuff.
Yeah, we'll go into more detail of those tomorrow. What other tools? Fire starter, that's right. What do you use fire for? What can we use it for? Warming our food, cooking in, heat, purifying water.
Protection.
Protection.
Better sleep.
Pardon? Making charcoal, very good. We didn't talk about that. Yes, you can make charcoal with it. All right, what other tools? What other tool? Pardon? Pocket knife. What? Pardon? First aid kit. What do you say about knives? 1 is none and
1 is none and 2 is 1.
2 is 1. So get a good pocket knife. Now,
And a fixed blade. We're going to talk more about the difference between fixed blade, folding knives, full tang, partial tang, all that. We're going to go into that tomorrow.
and the different uses for the different knives. Now, for me, you see some bigger knives up here, but they serve a different purpose. And so for me, I just want you to know that a knife to me is not a weapon. A knife to me is a tool. A wife too. A good tool. But that's a case where one is enough. Two is not good. All right, I'll just name them off. Cordage. And we're going to get into more of this too when we do some knot tying tomorrow. But cordage, very practical, very useful. Containers. You know, we need to collect water. We need to cook food. We're going to need containers. So start thinking of these things. Stoves. Do you have a wood-burning stove? How are you going to heat? How are you going to cook? There's a lot of things you can do with a wood stove.
And remember too, with the cooking, these honking big ginormous pots that we're used to using now to make a big old pot of soup that's going to last for 3 or 4 days, we don't have refrigeration. So it's not going to do us any good to make that big old honking pot of soup because it's going to go bad. So we're going to be cooking in smaller pots, okay?
Also gloves. Now, don't overlook gloves, as I mentioned. Gloves are really a good tool. They can save a lot of nicks and cuts, and because I do carpentry work, plumbing, and different things, I wear gloves all of the time. I used to not to. But I got cut so many times, and nicks and scrapes and Band-Aids, I just started wearing gloves. I didn't have those little cuts and nicks anymore. And when we're out there in the time when we can't go and have medical facility services, we don't want to be getting infections. We want to be protecting our body. So,
what are 2 other clothing items for those of you who were not here this morning? Those of you who were here, help them out. What are 2 other clothing items that are critically important. Footwear and a stocking cap. Yes, you've got to keep your head warm, and you've got to keep your feet warm and protected.
Okay. Bedding is another one. We want to have bedding, good bedding. And knowledge. Have knowledge, study, prepare. And, we can have first aid kits, but if we don't know how to use them, we need to know how to use these things. So make your own list. You know your needs. We've just given you some. Start investing in those. And we always recommend invest in something that is quality. Do your research. And if you don't know, like I said, there's so many preppers out there. You can always find good ideas of equipment, material. It's just a vast array that you can go on the internet for yourself. So what we want to do next now is, I wanted to mention also too, I am so thankful for institutions like this. I really am. Because there is something that is so important and it is so needed. We know that diseases are going to spread in the end times. And the knowledge that people are learning here, it is so valuable. You can't even put a price upon it. Because there are going to be so many people who have a need. And we will be able to meet their need. And remember, Jesus said, when you've done it unto the one of the least of these, my brethren, you've what? You've done it unto him. So I'm thankful for these institutions. What we want to do now is to go outside. Did anybody gather any sticks or twigs? Okay. Well, let's go outside right over here and let's see if we can put those sticks and twigs to use.